In the blink of an eye, my world shattered. I caught Karen, my wife, in the arms of another man. A betrayal so deep, it cut through my soul. The luxury of the hotel room contrasted sharply with the raw, searing pain in my heart. I confronted them, rage burning in my veins, the lover's smug face igniting my fury. A violent altercation erupted, the opulent surroundings now a battlefield of broken trust and shattered dreams. As Karen sobbed in the background, I stood over her defeated lover, triumph and despair warring within me. My life would never be the same. Chapter 1. Simple Times and Hard Lessons. Every life has its hard times. Everyone suffers in some way. Maybe you're born with a health problem, have a bad accident, or lose someone you love. These things happen to everyone at some point. The big hardship in my life came to light because of another terrible event, a terrorist attack in a small town that could be any place in the world. I think about those two sad events every day. They come to mind when I button my shirt, throw a ball, or sign my name. I grew up in that town, Sky Gray, Ohio. I went to public schools, played in Little League, explored the woods, and read books in the library. Back then, parents would let kids as young as 7 go out and play for hours without worry. We were more free before we knew about dangers like kidnappers. We'd get together for a game of slow-pitch baseball or half-court basketball. Sometimes we'd play fast-pitch baseball with a rubber ball in Jimmy's yard and run like crazy if we broke a window. We'd explore the nearby woods, climb trees, and play make-believe games like Army or Cowboys. I spent many afternoons hitting a tennis ball against a wall when no one else wanted to play, or I'd head to the library to read in the cool air conditioning. I didn't know how special those times were until much later. I went to Sky Gray Public High School and got good enough grades to go to college. My parents paid for it. I enjoyed college, girls, sports, reading, and not having to worry about money. Those were good years. I dated a few girls, especially Alice, who stayed with me for the last 2 years of college. I graduated with decent grades and a degree that wasn't very practical. At 22, I had the whole world in front of me. But I didn't feel ready for it. I tried different jobs like proofreading for a company making how-to books, working with kids at a daycare, and moving furniture in a warehouse. These were all low-paying jobs and had nothing to do with my college degree. Alice and I broke up, but neither of us was very upset. I lived with my parents, not worrying about much, but slowly realizing I needed a change. I joined the Marines and spent a few years as an infantry officer in Virginia and North Carolina. I never saw combat, as luck had it. My time was mostly spent in schools and programs, with a short stint in a combat unit that never went to war. Seasickness was my toughest enemy. In many ways, I was very fortunate. One time, I went back home for a friend's wedding. That's where I met Karen Ann Prynne. She went by Karen or Karen Ann and liked both names. I knew her from high school, but she was a year younger and we hadn't interacted much before. At the wedding reception, we were drawn to each other. Maybe it was my uniform. For sure, it was her looks. I hadn't really talked to her before that night. She was a little shy, about to graduate from college with a teaching license, and seemed different from anyone I'd known. We danced, talked, and laughed, and by the end of the night, I had a girlfriend. I thought she was the most beautiful, smart, and good-hearted person I'd ever met. I felt something for her that I'd never felt for Alice or any other girl. We only saw each other a few times over 3 months after the reception, but I was sure she was the one. She kissed me and we were close, but didn't have much opportunity for more. I felt serious about her and thought she felt the same way. I saw how she gently talked to kids and gave money to a beggar in downtown Cincinnati. She seemed perfect to me. I was in love. I went home whenever I could, and Karen Ann and I got more serious as my last year of service went on. We got engaged in September and planned to marry over Christmas when I would be home for 2 weeks. It was going to be a small, secret ceremony. Karen Ann organized everything with the church. Even though I had to work on Thanksgiving Day, she found a way to fly to Raleigh. We spent the weekend after Thanksgiving together in a motel. We were very close, and it was clear we loved each other. Her body was beautiful, and for that weekend, we only had eyes for each other. We embraced, kissed, and spent the time just being together. I left her at the airport in Raleigh early Monday morning. Then I drove back to my base at Lejeune. I made it by 6:30. I told the captain my girlfriend was in town. He said, I knew there was a reason for that smile. 5 weeks later, it was Christmas. I had time off until January 3rd. My duties in the Corps were ending, so I flew home. We got married in the Episcopal Church to make our parents happy. Neither of us really believed in spirits, God, or Jesus. We informed them a week before Christmas that we had the wedding planned. We wanted only them and a few friends to attend, and that's how it happened. Christmas fell on a Wednesday. We got married on Thursday with about 20 people there, and by 7 in the evening, we were in a motel in Cincinnati. I still remember that date. We were together when she said, I'm pregnant, John, since Thanksgiving. It was a loving, intense moment. That night, Karen was on the bed, and I was slowly moving closer to her when she turned her head and said, that feels so good. You have me now. She had a happy look, glad to tell me such news. I had always wanted kids. We kept going that night, and she yelled, yes, as loud as she could. We were together for about 30 minutes. She moved a lot, sometimes up on her hands, other times with her head on a pillow. I was on my knees, changing positions. She talked when she could, saying, stay with me, or I love you. We only did it that one long time on that special occasion, but I woke up in the middle of the night thinking, is there anything better in life? I felt lucky. Karen Ann was everything I dreamed of. I had married the best woman. I won the lottery. We stayed in that motel, ate at its restaurant, and shopped nearby. But mostly, we spent time together day and night. Even our more intense moments were full of love, but not everything is perfect. On the last day of the year, she started to cramp and bleed. She said, John, this shouldn't be happening, and we lost the baby. We spent day and night at a hospital in the Clifton area of the city. It was a sad, close time for us. The doctors could not explain it. They said these things happen more often than we know. They told us to wait and try again. Still, the world felt different. Bad things happened for no reason, and we couldn't avoid them all. We didn't tell our parents right away. They still pretended our first night together was the wedding night. But they knew. There was no reason to tell them about the miscarriage since Karen Ann was okay. It was our secret, something that made our marriage stronger. I called the duty officer of my battalion and asked for extra days off because of my wife's condition, which was granted after he notified the XO. I was a liaison officer with routine duties that others could cover. I returned to Camp Lejeune on January 4th. Karen Ann stayed in Sky Gray. We would live with her parents once I left the Marines in July until we could get a house or rent an apartment. I soon got reassigned, spending the last 6 months running one of the rifle ranges, an assignment often given to an officer about to leave. As July ended, I drove home to a warm, welcome, and quiet moments at my in-laws' place. A few weeks later, I found a job at a rural hospital. I organized volunteers and planned events for medical staff. My title was Professional Careers Enhancement Coordinator at the Hospital of Our Merciful Lord. The hospital was growing fast as nearby communities relied on it. I helped doctors and nurses maintain or upgrade their certificates and licenses. I also coordinated with medical colleges and other hospitals when needed. I organized lectures for new or advancing professionals. Merciful Lord lacked a standard personnel department, and I hoped my position would grow into that. We found a small house in town with 2 bedrooms and a small utility room that could become a 3rd bedroom. We would use one room, and any future kid could use the other until we could convert the back room or upgrade to a bigger place. It had 1 bath, a small laundry room, and no basement. The backyard was small but large enough to toss baseballs. There was a small patio with an oak tree for shade. There was also a dying ash tree, once magnificent but now dying from borers. I think Karen Ann was a bit disappointed with the house, but it was better than an apartment. We moved into our new place on September 20th, right after we bought it. So we only stayed with her parents for a couple of months, which wasn't too bad. The day after I got my new job, there was a party for all the new staff, doctors, admin people, and others. Karen Ann and I went to it. We met some nurses, doctors, and the main bosses. They introduced me and the other new folks. Karen Ann wore a gray dress that got a lot of attention. It showed a bit too much for a Catholic hospital. She liked how people noticed her, and she enjoyed the evening. I felt proud to be her husband. Looking back, I wish I had paid more attention to Karen Ann that night. In early October, we found out she was pregnant with Dylan. We confirmed it in November. As her belly grew, Karen Ann's back started to hurt. So we bought a firmer mattress, which she said helped. She had picked names already, Dylan for a boy, Hanley for a girl. Dylan was born in June. He was happy, healthy, and long. He seemed cheerful from the start, and I played with him a lot. Karen Ann liked watching us. Dylan brought us so much joy. By December, Dylan was 7 months old when Karen Ann told me she was pregnant again. But sadly, like our first pregnancy, this one didn't last. We celebrated Christmas with Dylan crawling around, which was wonderful. The thought of another child due in August kept us warm. But in January, Karen Ann started hurting again. We called for help and took Dylan to my parents. I took my wife to the hospital for another procedure to remove the pregnancy since it didn't go well. This time, we were at my workplace, and I stayed by her side the whole time. The doctors were puzzled by our bad luck, but said 2 miscarriages weren't uncommon. They reassured us since we had 1 healthy child. If it happened again, they'd run some tests. They told us to take time to heal. We did, and our patience paid off. I believed in our strong marriage, especially after the 2 losses. I comforted Karen Ann, kissing her as she cried, grieving more over lost dreams than physical pain. After the first loss, Karen Ann held on to me tightly, both physically and emotionally. She clung to my arm in public, sticking close as we walked. After the second loss, she accepted my comfort but often seemed distant, as if she needed to say something but couldn't. It looked like she was searching for something that wasn't there. I wondered if the pain of losing the pregnancies made her want fewer children. I thought it might also be due to the stresses of work and raising a kid. By August, we were expecting again, and this time it was our little girl, Hanley, who we had prayed for. She was born on April 1st with dark hair and chubby cheeks. Her big brother found it interesting to have a new sibling, though he now had to share attention and hugs. As any parent knows, life doesn't pause for night feedings and crying at odd hours. We often felt tired getting ready for work. I felt I was doing well at my job, and my boss seemed satisfied. But Karen Ann felt more worn out after returning to her teaching job in May. We decided to wait before having more kids. We were busy enough with Hanley and teaching Dylan to take 1 step at a time. Our house felt crowded, and we had to decide what to do. Hanley slept in a bassinet with us, and Dylan had his own room, close enough for us to hear him. Nights were rarely calm. Hanley would wake up for a feed or just to wiggle around. We tried to stay cheerful, sometimes faking it. One night after a wake-up call, we watched an old Humphrey Bogart movie. We cuddled on the couch, feeling a warm connection despite the tiredness. Moments like that made us feel loved. Being young parents, we faced the usual struggles while saving for a bigger house and better jobs. I didn't worry much. I knew this was just part of life. We had hope that things would get better. My job at Merciful Lord was a mix of tasks that few noticed. After Hanley was born, my boss asked about my future plans. I told him I needed more responsibility or I'd have to find something better. With 2 kids, I needed a real career. He seemed to understand, but left me wondering if he wanted me to leave. Hanley was just a month old, and Dylan would turn 2 soon. Karen Ann had lovingly given birth to 2 children, faced 2 miscarriages, and accepted my contentment with our life. For me, life was full of joy, with just the usual worries of a man in his late 20s. Everything changed with the tragic event, not because of it, but because that happy life we thought we had never really existed. It was always a dream in many ways. I had been at our Merciful Lord for almost 3 years when the terrible event happened. Chapter 2. The Shooting at Our Merciful Lord. The shooting happened at my hospital on June 3rd, early in the morning. You might have heard about it. Some call it a massacre, a terrorist attack, or jihad. No matter what you call it, many people died. It was a sunny day, not too hot. I was checking on a lecture for new surgeons in Classroom 2 at 8:30 a.m. and a demonstration of cancerous liver tissue in Classroom 1A at 8:45. My watch said 8:28. I walked to Classroom 2, which was nearby. People were standing around when I heard shots behind me. If you haven't heard an M16 fire, it is not very loud but shocking indoors. It sounds like sharp cracks if fired in short patterns, and that was what I heard from the main entrance behind me. It was much louder than at the shooting range. At first, everyone thought it was firecrackers, but I knew it wasn't. The pops kept going. The shooters had plenty of targets. New doctors were near the door to classroom 2, looking surprised. I said, "That's gunfire. Get in the room, in the room." They seemed unsure, so I pushed them to move. "You can get out the rear window if it's safe. Look first. I'll lock the door here. Block it if you need to." I heard, "Oh my God, and what is this?" And then they moved. "I'm locking the door now. Be careful," I said as a young woman doctor stared at me. I closed and locked the door. There were many, many pops. I turned back to the hall. The sound came in little groups of 3. Pop, 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 pop. Not automatic, but 3 shots as fast as the finger could pull the trigger, and repeated. It was disciplined. The shooters didn't need to use much ammo. Trained killers, I thought. I moved carefully beyond my little office. I heard more shooting and screams, then lower, deeper shots, probably from a security guard. There were 3 or 4 of these, and then they stopped. A moment later, I peeked around the hall bend and saw a security guard on the floor in a pool of blood. He was behind a counter with holes in it, likely shot while hiding. I still didn't see the shooter or shooters. There were screams and voices, very unsettling. Farther down the hall, I saw several bodies on the floor, none of them moving. Pop, 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 pop. As I got closer, the sound hurt my ears. I moved to the guard, crouched, felt his neck, but he was gone. Ah, Tommy. I sighed loudly. I took the semi-automatic pistol from his hand and found 2 loaded magazines on his belt. I released the magazine from his 9mm pistol. The magazine fell out, and I saw it held 11 rounds, so I replaced it with a full magazine with 15 rounds loaded and put the other 2 magazines in my pocket. I checked the gun. It was ready to fire. I heard more shots down the main hall near the elevators. Pop, 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 pop. I heard a thump and a groan, like someone sighing loudly, as I reached the main elevator hall intersection. There were 2 bodies behind the information counter, Mrs. Sissom and a man I didn't know from the business office. Jody Sissom was still alive. She was crying softly. "Jody, it's John. I'm going down the hall. How many did you see? How many, Jody?" "Just 1, but I heard another one shooting." "Am I going to die?" she said. I crouched on the other side of the counter, out of sight. "I hope not," I said. "Hang in there, Jody. Hold pressure on your wound. I'm going down the hall, so you shouldn't see them. Good luck." As I made my way down the hall, I saw body after body keeping close to the left wall. I passed the elevators. I saw empty 30-round magazines taped together and left on the floor. Oh my God, I thought. 60 rounds from 1 gun already? I stepped over a body I didn't know, walked by an orderly with a head wound, eyes open and unseeing. I passed the cardiology waiting room where people were on the floor. "If anyone can move, the hall is clear behind me. Head straight out the main entrance." A man and a woman got up, moved carefully, then ran for the doors behind me. 4 people didn't move. They just lay there. That made 10, I thought. Blood was everywhere. I passed the waiting room. I heard more shooting ahead near the cardiology operating rooms and the cafeteria back door. This shooting sounded like a gunfight. I moved down the empty hall, scared. I thought, you have 2 kids and a wife, and this is not part of your job. The cafeteria door was partly open. I saw them. They were 2 dark-haired men in camouflage, shooting at people having breakfast in the cafeteria. It seemed those folks hadn't noticed or understood the shootings in the hall. The killers had come into the cafeteria behind the coffee line. 10 or 12 people were on the floor, all appearing dead. Others were hiding, either playing dead or just scared they'd be next. The shooting had stopped because things were different now. The killers were just 5 feet from me. They were looking at 2 security guards on the other side of the cafeteria. The guards were aiming their guns but couldn't shoot because there were hostages involved. The killers were close to each other, only 5 feet apart. One had a rifle on the floor next to him. He held a woman with his left arm and pointed a pistol at her with his right. The other guy held a rifle at the guards with one hand and had a young boy around the neck with the other. They were slightly ahead from my angle. They were using the hostages as shields. I looked out through the open doorway and saw the guards could see me behind the killers. I recognized one of them. I pointed at the guy with the pistol, signaling 1 to the guards, then pointed at the guy with the rifle and signaled 2. I indicated myself and mimicked shooting first the guy on the left, then the guy on the right. I moved the pistol to my left hand. I quickly ran through the steps in my mind, recalling what Captain Malarkey had taught us. This should be a moment of max AG, maximum aggression. I took a deep breath. It was fast. I took 2 quick steps into the cafeteria. I moved to the left behind the guy, knocked his pistol up from the woman's head with my right hand, and with my left hand, shot him in the side of the head from just 2 inches away. I aimed the gun slightly so the bullet would miss the woman, and it did. The recoil was more than I expected. I had never fired with my left hand alone. I felt a pain in my right hand, but focused on the other guy. Time slowed down. The second killer turned his head to me, surprised. I shouted a deep, "Ah!" Pivoted on my right foot, took a big step with my left foot, and put my pistol in his face. He made a grimace, and I shot him from 5 inches away through his cheekbone. He didn't have time to aim his rifle. Both killers lay on the floor. I kept my pistol on him, ready to shoot again if he moved. I've never regretted those shots. After a long silence, there were screams and cries. The woman cried and turned to the boy. He was probably shaking, but neither of them was hurt. I kept my pistol pointed at the killers, still angry. They were definitely dead. I kicked their weapons away and leaned over them, saying, "You messed with the wrong Marine." My right hand was hurt. The bullet hit my hand when I deflected the killer's gun. The guards arrived and asked if I was okay. There was a fog in my mind. "Were there only 2?" I asked. Bill Meyer, the guard I knew, said, "Yeah, pretty sure. Others are checking. You okay, Mr. Buck?" I took a deep breath and felt weak. "Hurt my hand." The woman and boy were holding each other. "You two okay, ma'am?" I asked. They were crying and hugging. Thank God," she said, tearing up, nodding at me. "I need to sit, Bill," I said. My left hand was shaking with the pistol. I handed it to him. I took it off Tommy out front. He was, "I know, John, I know." "Jody was hurt. Someone should see to her," I said. Blood ran down my arm and dripped. "I'm making a mess." The world seemed slow. I sat by the crying woman and her son, resting my right elbow and holding my hand up to stop the bleeding. My left hand squeezed my wrist. Suddenly, policemen were everywhere. I looked at my watch. 8:43. It had taken only 15 minutes. It was almost time for that liver dissection. There were many dead and injured. Medical staff were everywhere helping the wounded. Father Mihalis, a priest, was performing last rites and praying. He saw me holding my hand, nodded, and continued his work. The police took care of the mother and son. In my daze, I felt a hand on my left shoulder. I looked up at the woman still holding her son, and she was crying. She squeezed my shoulder and tried to say, "Thank you," but no sound came out. I nodded back. A policeman began to wrap my hand and asked what happened. I told him I killed the killers. He looked at me and said, "Good. You might not want to talk about it, but to us cops." Then he left to talk to others. I kept rewrapping my bandage as it soaked through. They eventually put me in a room and left me there to avoid further embarrassment for shooting myself in the hand. An orderly wrapped my right hand again later to stop the bleeding, but I wasn't a big priority with all the chaos around the building. I wanted to let Karen Ann know I was okay. Getting my phone out of my pocket was hard with my injured hand, but I managed after a few tries. The cell lines were probably busy, so I couldn't get a message through at first. I kept trying every few minutes. By 10:30, I finally reached Karen Ann at her school. The school secretary put my call through even though Karen Ann was in class because the Merciful Lord Hospital shooting was all over the news, and everyone in Little Sky Gray, Ohio had heard about it. Karen Ann. "Hey, yeah, I'm fine. Well, gonna be fine. You heard about the shooting? It's awful. Yeah, I saw some of it. Karen Ann, stay calm now. I got shot in the hand, babe. Yeah, it's not too bad. No, I did. Me. I shot myself by accident. Anyway, they'll probably operate on it in the next few days. It's not like the others. Awful, babe. No, I don't know if any doctors were shot. Calm down. I'm okay. I'll find out more about who was hurt soon, I'm sure. Yeah, thank God. I'll probably stay here overnight. Come see me after school. Good. It's disorganized here right now. Cops everywhere. Love. Love you too." She seemed really worried, even scared about finding out who else was hurt. I assumed there'd be a lot of sadness in Sky Gray that day. I called my mom, who sounded upset and tearful. I asked her to put Dad on. I explained everything to him. I didn't tell him I shot the guys. I decided I should tell the police and no one else. My mom asked for updates on my hand, but I just laughed and said I'd call if there was any news. I lay back and thought about things. It was strange that in the middle of this chaos, with policemen and government officials everywhere, I was alone for long times. I had time to think. I think big events make you think deeply. I thought about Karen Ann. In our talk, she seemed like she had something to say, but couldn't. I didn't expect that. I thought she'd be very worried about my wound and practical about finding a substitute teacher and other stuff. She quickly stopped talking about my wound and moved on to other things, which made sense to me given others were hurt worse. I thought I would make her feel better, but she seemed just as worried. We had changed in the last few years, since we got married and I came back from the Marines. Since we moved to the small house, since she got pregnant with Dylan, her energy had lessened. More than that, we had not talked, not held each other, not spent much time together. I remembered one time we held each other in the middle of the night. It was a rare moment. We still had intimacy, but it was more routine. She no longer liked romantic talk or moments, dates, hints of intimacy to come, or anything like that. I wondered if it was me. We were just settling into normal married life. I missed the excitement of our early intimate life. I missed the warmth we had before the children. I shook my head. Missed it. Chapter 3. Aftermath. Karen Ann found someone to cover her last classes and made it to the hospital by 1:30. I was in a hospital gown by this time, but I had no restrictions or drip or anything yet. Painkillers were given by injection or orally when needed. The hospital was very busy with the ongoing tragedy of the dead and hurt. Doctors were operating in all the surgeries. I later found out we sent many to Dayton and Cincinnati hospitals if they could travel and needed an operation. Karen Ann rushed across the room and hugged me as I sat on the bed, my bandaged hand in the air. I thought it looked like a giant cotton swab with the thick gauze on it. It was too much emotionally for her. Tears came. "Who was killed? Do you know? They aren't releasing names yet," she said. She looked around my hand to see me. I said, "I only know one or two for sure by name, no one we hung out with. I saw the bodies of some I didn't know, some visitors or patients. There were a lot, blood everywhere." She wiped her eyes. "I saw blood on the floor, bullet holes and police tape. Father Michael put me on the elevator. They weren't going to let me in," she said. Shaking her head, resting her hand on my shoulder, looking off a bit, she went on, "On the radio, they just said they have no reason for why it happened and they can't name the guys yet. They said neither man had any ID and no one seemed to know who they were. Everyone thinks they were extremists. It's so strange. I mean, why here? We don't have a building over 4 stories except for the hospital," she said. "We're nobody." She asked, "So, can you tell me what happened? To you?" "Yeah. Mostly I came across dead or dying people. I decided I'd give her the same version I'd give everyone except the police. I'd tell her the details when she was settled and calm." She was very upset, with puffy eyes and panic in her voice on the phone, which surprised me. I never thought of her as the panicky type. Some things I would leave out. I heard shooting down the hall, and I got some new doctors to leave through the window of the classroom. Then I kind of followed the killers down the halls to the cafeteria, where I finally saw them. I had a pistol I took from a guard who was down, and the first time I fired it, I shot my own hand. There were security guys there, and the bad guys were killed. Was I protecting myself by pointing to the foolish part of the incident? Was I avoiding her? Hurt like hell, babe. There was a mother and her 15-year-old child being held hostage by criminals. They made it out alive but were very scared. Then the police arrived. Karen Ann spoke with a tone I'd never heard before, sweet but sarcastic. "I think you're brave, even if you're not good with a gun. All that Marine training was too long ago, I guess," she said. It felt like she had lost all respect for me. She didn't seem to understand that I had shot my right hand even though I'm right-handed. I had loved Karen Ann since we met at a wedding. She had been strong through 2 miscarriages and faced surgeries with courage. I stood by her every step of the way. But this time, something was different. I couldn't understand the look in her eyes. I suddenly realized my wife didn't respect me. Maybe it was because I left the Marines, our small house, or my low-paying job. She saw me as useless and had built this image of me over time. "Your humble nature isn't doing you any favors, John," I thought. "In a world where everyone brags, you stay modest. Even your wife thinks you're a fool." There was a knock on the door. John Buck?" A woman stood there holding a badge. "I'm with the police." I need to talk to you about what happened. She walked in. Of course, officer. This is my wife, Karen Ann, I said. Karen Ann said, I'll leave now. I'll check on the kids. She left quickly, not interested in what was happening and more concerned about the children. The detective apologized for interrupting. I shook my head, understanding how it looked. I told her my story in as much detail as I could. She asked questions. I hadn't seen the criminals before. No, I didn't see a third shooter. I knew how to use a pistol from my time in the Marines, but I had never fired left-handed. She looked at me and nodded. Mr. Buck, do you know what you did? I remembered the blood and shooting 2 men. I killed 2 bad people. She said their identities hadn't been released and that my actions were being talked about in the news, but my name wasn't out there yet. The only people who saw me were 2 security guards and the hostages, a woman and her son. Others were hiding or trying to get away. The detective advised me to keep things quiet. If these men were terrorists, the less information out there, the better. Karen Ann came back in tears 2 hours later. I thought she was upset about the violence and the scale of the disaster. She just kept saying it was terrible and crying. Names of the dead and injured were being released. She stayed with me until I had to go for an X-ray, and she listened as the doctor explained the surgery I needed. She stayed until 9 that evening, then went home to prepare for the next day. She planned to be there for my surgery and had taken the day off. The school district was thinking about closing schools because many families were affected. The attack was big news. At midnight, they released a detailed list of casualties. 9 hospital employees had died, including Thomason, the guard whose pistol I had used. His careful maintenance of his weapon had ended lives that day. Among the dead was an administrator I knew well, Curtis Wills, the hospital's chief accountant. A few people I knew in passing, 2 doctors, one of whom had pioneered a heart valve operation. Jody was still alive, but more people had died. 12 visitors were killed in the waiting area and cafeteria. In total, 37 people were treated in hospitals, in conditions ranging from critical to good. I was listed as fair. Mrs. Spagnol and her son Tony were alive thanks to the security guards who confronted the gunmen. No one knew the motive, but many assumed it was religious extremism targeting small-town America. At 4 in the morning, I woke up disoriented. I was in a hospital room. Karen Ann was home with the kids. My hand hurt badly. They planned to operate on it in a few hours. I stared at the ceiling, thinking of the bodies and Karen Ann's strange behavior. Something was off, but I tried not to jump to conclusions. Karen Ann called around 5:30 a.m. to say she would be there after the surgery. She needed to take the kids to her parents and do some work for school. She was sorry she couldn't be there before the surgery. Dr. Tara Betrayal, a top-hand doctor in our area, operated on my hand at 7 a.m. My grip would never be as strong, but I would have one. All my fingers could work, and I could feel and lift things as long as I didn't push too hard. I could throw a ball, but letting it go might be tricky. Opening jars was probably over for me. People would notice my handshake was weak. I was just a bit disabled, but it wasn't obvious. She worked on my hand for 5 hours, which seemed like a long time. I was in one of those sleepy states that felt almost awake. After the operation, I thought I saw Karen Ann by my side, and she was there, but so was a tired-looking man. I was a bit out of it for a while, so the man stayed back until I asked who he was. Karen Ann said, "I don't really know. He has a badge." He stepped up. "Mr. Buck, I'm Special Agent Remark. I'm with Homeland Security." He let me think about that for a moment. "Mrs. Buck, you should hear this. After yesterday, we think you and your family might be in danger of revenge from the Islamic World Caliphate, the group that attacked the hospital." Karen Ann's eyes went wide. "Why us?" she asked. "Because of what your husband did yesterday," Remark said, looking at her like she didn't get it. "For shooting himself in the hand?" she asked, then laughed. It sounded a bit mocking to me. The agent looked at both of us and saw our faces. I shook my head just a tiny bit. He noticed and looked back at Karen Ann. She hid any confidence she had in me, which I now saw was very little. Her disdain was almost childish. I realized she seemed arrogant. Among all her traits, I had never seen arrogance in her before. Seeing our interaction, Remark decided not to give too many details. He was good at handling such situations with only partial information. No, just for being involved at all. We think we can keep the story somewhat quiet, which should help protect everyone involved. The guards, the hostages, the witnesses, and— He paused to glance at me. The guy who stopped the terrorists. We've got the videos from the 2 cameras in the cafeteria, and the ones in the hall don't show much. There's a cell phone video on YouTube that shows the takedown, but it's blurry and dark and the voice is unclear, he said. Mr. Buck, we'd like your help in keeping everyone's name out of it. Maybe Karen Ann thought I was just a witness. I had let her think that. I thought of the guards, Jody, the Spagnols. That should be fine. What about the guards? They want to keep it quiet. We're keeping their names out of the news too, and the 2 hostages. Everyone knows what happened, but not who did what. We'd like everyone to leave the names out. The guards will say it was someone they didn't know, a visitor probably. Hopefully that will keep everyone safe. No one should say anyone's name. You saw what happened? Karen Ann asked me, surprised I was that close to it. That was the closest she came to being impressed or respectful. Maybe it was my fault for not being clear. Yeah, I saw it. You could say that. Then I shot my hand, got really sick, and the police were everywhere, I said. I'd not realized she thought so little of me. I trusted Karen Ann with everything. Even though I joked about my mistakes, I thought she thought more highly of me. Part of marriage is to love and honor. What does honoring your spouse mean? Didn't she see humility as a good thing? She likely did, in theory. She just didn't see it in me. Humility needed a level of skill she didn't think I had. I was let down by her. I wondered what had gone wrong between us and when it had happened. I'll be back later, Mr. Buck, Special Agent Remark said, and we'll need to discuss more details. Anytime, sir. I'll be here all day today and tomorrow until noon. That's what the doctor said. After that, I'll be home for a few days. Do you have my address? He nodded and left. Karen Ann put her head on my shoulder, awkward though that was. Glad you're okay, she said. Me too, I said. Did you see who killed them? She asked. I didn't see much of him, I said, telling the truth in a way. I'll keep quiet. I decided to try harder to talk with her, to ask her thoughts, to share mine and accept disagreements. I wanted to lessen the gap between us. I wanted Karen Ann to love me as much as I loved her. My good arm was around her, her head was on my chest, and I kissed her hair. Hash, hash, hash. Chapter 4. Arrogance and Disloyalty. For a while, the arrogance of some top doctors at our hospital had bothered me. One surgeon made a small mistake during a liver transplant by cutting a drain tube and had to replace it to keep the operation going. It wasn't a big deal. The operation went well and the patient was okay, but I watched as he told the family about the surgery. Still in his scrubs, he poured some bad coffee from the pot in the waiting room, then sat with the family, acting casual. He held the cup to his lips but didn't really drink. After talking about the successful surgery, he said, "Oh, one little thing." Then he mentioned the small mistake, as the law required. Cheek, I thought. He knew their main worry was the condition of their loved one. This man sold difficult surgeries like a referee making bad calls or a car salesman selling a slightly damaged but usable car. It bothered me. Legally, doctors have to admit they're human and make mistakes. Most do, most of the time. But listen closely for their confessions. They're just people. I saw things differently as I got more experience with doctors. One of our doctors couldn't save a woman with a bad heart problem. He was so upset that he threw tools and broke a light, scaring the other doctor and nurses around him. He was arrogant and angry. I thought, wow, I'd want him fighting for me, my kid, my wife, or my mom, and really caring if he couldn't save them. If he didn't believe the surgery could work, who would? Arrogance seemed a small price to pay for knowledge, skill, and determination, all in one person. Doctors deal with us in our worst moments. Sometimes they act arrogant to seem confident. Not all doctors are like this, but it's not rare. Some are more relaxed, joking, and kind, looking into a patient's eyes as if every word mattered. Often, arrogance builds up the confidence of doctor, patient, and family when it's most needed. But that doesn't make them easy to like. I don't fault the arrogant ones, nor do I want to be around them. Sean Dunstan was an arrogant one. Many nurses and doctors had been scolded by him during operations, even with the patient on the table. "He thinks he's God," a frustrated nurse said once. But likability didn't matter. Dunstan was a very good doctor. A magazine rated him the best heart doctor in our area. He created a method that greatly helped heart transplant patients and wrote a paper on heart valve surgery. The hospital was proud to have him. Since his paper was published 10 months before the shootings, he was invited to speak at many hospitals across the country. Hospitals like Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and UCLA wanted him. Why would a guy like that stay at a country hospital like ours? Rumor said he'd leave once his contract ended, maybe moving to New York or Los Angeles. He had a bright future until he got shot in the heart in our cafeteria. He was young, only 40, tall, dark, and probably athletic. He picked the wrong time to get coffee, and he was hit by a bullet, destroying most of his heart, which he knew how to replace in others. I didn't know him well, but we'd see each other in the hall sometimes. I'd met him at 2 parties over 3 years. He'd wave at me without really looking, showing that I didn't matter much to him. He was known to attract big donations, having led the heart transplant team for the last 4 years. Our small hospital rarely did heart transplants, making us one of the few regional hospitals to do so. I often told people I knew him. Sometimes he was the reason people had heard of our hospital or our town, Sky Gray, Ohio. I went home on Friday, 2 days after the shooting. I had to lie on the couch with my hand in a strange device. I slept on the couch due to the device. I liked seeing the kids. Hanley was still not moving much, and Dylan was starting to speak. Karen Ann took them to her parents' or mine so they were cared for, and I didn't have to do much. She had a lot to do that weekend and work on Monday and Tuesday since school was canceled. She was on the phone a lot on Saturday. I spent most of my time at home, figuring out how to use the bathroom with my hand in a wheeled holder, learning to use the remote with my left hand. I watched the news, saw the blurry video of my actions. Anyone who looked carefully could see that the shooter shot his own hand. They heard the yell when I shot the second guy. My statement standing over them was clear, but it didn't sound like my voice. I doubted anyone could tell it was me, maybe Karen Ann or my dad. Dad might recognize how I stood. Anyway, I was praised anonymously on TV. One guy called me a hero, another on MSNBC called me an unknown savior. I shook my head. The video identified the shooter as a Marine. I thought I'd be identified too, but I wasn't. Karen Ann was in and out on Sunday, shopping and even going to the mall for clothes for me. Shirts I could pull over my bandaged hand with no buttons. She went to Walmart around midnight to make sure we had what we needed. I didn't see why she rushed. The community was coming to terms with the tragedy. Funerals started on Saturday, with more to come in the week ahead. One notable memory was of a Monday. Wills, the accountant, had passed away. He was my friend. I didn't go to his funeral because I couldn't drive while taking so many painkillers. One of the dead terrorists had a brother, as we later found out. I imagined his brother begging him not to go, but his brother refusing. I pictured their farewell. "This is not your mission. You're not trained. You have a different path," might have been his brother's last words before he left for Ohio. Maybe Youssef hugged him briefly, hand on his neck. I thought about Youssef on the day of the attack, as pain throbbed in my hand. He must have heard that his brother died, but killed very few. The mission was supposed to be momentous, facing untrained locals with trained fighters. Youssef wouldn't become the great hero he hoped to be. Maybe he was sad about his brother's failure, dying so quickly. Youssef was gone now, shot by a bystander. Not a failure, but not the honor they expected. In a small town near Indianapolis, maybe he knelt facing east, tears streaming down his face. Karen Ann still had school. The last 2 days of the teacher schedule were Monday and Tuesday. I asked her what she did on the last days without students. She told me about counting books, taking down posters, cleaning walls, writing recommendations, checking grades, and attending meetings. She looked tired, with only 5 or 6 hours of sleep after all her shopping and work. She kissed me goodbye Monday morning and left around 6:30, wearing blue jeans and a work shirt, saying she'd be home at the usual time. She took the kids to her mom's house across town, so I wouldn't have to care for them. Around 10:15 a.m., Terry Marks called asking for Karen Ann. As the team leader, Terry needed to verify grades, and one of Karen Ann's grades didn't match the student's average. This happened when a teacher decided a student deserved a higher grade than the average. She had a question about the grade Karen Ann gave a student. Karen Ann's not here. She should be there with you guys. She left here at the usual time, I said. Oh, I thought she stayed home to take care of you, Terry said. Took a sick day. No, she's not here. If she's not there, I don't know where she is. It's probably my mistake, Terry said, realizing her error. She sounded almost desperate, like she had made a big mistake. I didn't understand. She's probably in another part of the building. I just haven't seen her yet, but all her stuff's here, so there's no reason she'd need to be up here. I thought for a minute. Well, I can't help you, Terry. I'll let her know you're looking for her when I see her. Thanks, John. Hope your hand feels better. Thanks. Bye. I hung up. Terry's mistake was calling our home phone instead of Karen Ann's cell phone. Around 12:30 p.m., Karen Ann called to check on me. John, how's everything at home? She asked. Fine, babe. How's school? Oh, so much to do to close up the room and things. So many books to count and stack and any missing ones to note. It gets tiring after hours of working alone. I have a lot to pack this year. Why don't you pick me up and I'll keep you company? No, I'm going to go out with some other teachers for lunch, she said. You take it easy. I'll see you around 4:30, okay? Fine, Karen Ann. See you then. Love you, I said. Me too, John. Bye. Father Michaels called that afternoon. John, this is Mike. I know what you did, John. I spoke to the security guards before the police did, but we're doing everything we can to keep it quiet. It's best if your name isn't out there for the extremists. Thank you, sir. I hope to be back at work next week or so. Take your time and heal. Things won't be normal here for a while. It's pretty awful. There are a lot of Homeland Security agents and police around, some dressed for combat. I could picture him shaking his head. Okay, well, one of the investigators is supposed to come by tomorrow, I said. My hand is pretty useless, and the bulky wrap is tough to manage. I'll stay in touch. I have funerals all week and insurance issues, but I'll contact you. Get better, come in and see me if I'm around, and we'll talk about some ideas I have. I might change your job a bit. Or a lot. Yes, sir. Thanks for calling. So he was considering changing my job? Father knew what he was doing. He was purposely making me anxious, trying to get me eager to return to work. I wondered what ideas he had. Karen Ann and the kids arrived around 5, Dylan running up to me with a heavy diaper and Hanley in her arms. Tonight I just want to relax and watch you play with the kids, she said, smiling. I'll second that. I don't have to use that device anymore, thanks to Dr. Beetle, I said. She'd said just through Sunday, so I'd slept in our bed next to Karen Ann. We ordered pizza, watched TV, got Hanley to smile, and played with Dylan, who laughed out loud. After feeding Hanley, we put the kids to bed, and the evening was calm. We sat on the couch and kissed a bit, enjoying each other's company. She laughed and said, "Careful, you'll get wet." Think she left any for me? I asked, opening the flap of her feeding bra, the least appealing piece of female underwear ever made. Why don't you find out? The milk tasted sweet, but I already knew that. Tuesday morning arrived quickly, and the memory of our first time being close in months stuck with me. I've always liked waking up with the memory of last night's intimacy. Since Hanley was born 9 weeks ago, life had been tough. Karen Ann didn't want to take all her maternity leave with the school year ending soon, and then there was the shooting. Romance was hard to come by. Last night was wonderful, even if a little messy, but it made me feel good again. Karen Ann was getting ready for school, wearing a nice pants outfit. I watched her. She finished, noticed me looking in the mirror, and came over. She sat beside me, put her arm around me, leaned down, and kissed me gently. I have to go now. Mom and Dad will watch the kids, so don't worry. She said it softly. She kissed me again, got up, and at the door she looked back and said, "Bye, John." "Have a good day, Karen Ann," I replied. She nodded and left. It must be hard, I thought. Around 10:15 a.m., the doorbell rang. I was dressed and ready when I opened it. A young girl looking like a high school student stood there with a ponytail, wearing shorts and a sleeveless shirt. She smiled brightly. "John Buck?" "Yes." "Oh, your hand is hurt," she asked. "Here, you've been served," she said, handing me a manila envelope. I almost fainted. Divorce was one of the words I saw. Me? I asked the girl if she had the right address, the right name. Was this for me? "Yes, sir. You are John Buck at this address, sued by Karen Ann Prynne Buck. I see this a lot," she said in a cheerful what-can-you-do voice. "Well, sorry, gotta go," and she skipped off to her tiny car. She drove away. I stood there holding a big envelope of papers, not sure what to do. I stood there for a long time. Finally, I went inside where it was cool. I sat at the kitchen table, but my mind was blank. I searched for my phone and found it. Karen Ann didn't pick up. I left a message. "Karen, what's going on? Divorce? Please explain this." Then I called her school. The secretary said, "She took today off, Mr. Buck. She said she had lots to do and needed to go out of town. She promised to finish next week or so." I called her parents, Rose and Bob Prynne. They were never big fans of mine, but not bad folks. "Hello, Rose. This is John. Do you know what's up with Karen Ann? I was just served divorce papers. I can't reach her, and the school says she's out of town. Do you know anything?" "Oh, John," said Rose with sympathy. "Then I heard her give the phone to Bob." "Yeah, John. She told us when she picked up the kids yesterday," he said. "You should look closely at the papers, John, especially about the kids, okay? She had to make sure they get what's theirs." "What do you mean, the kids? What?" "They're not yours, John. She had an affair with a doctor named Dunstan. They're his kids, and she's making sure they get their share. He said he'd take care of them. She planned to marry him in 6 months, so everything was set." I felt a weight in my chest. I was silent, thinking about what I wanted to know. "Did you know about the affair, sir? Before last night?" I asked. He said nothing, but I heard him breathing, so I knew the answer. I hung up. I had never felt like this. Heartbreak was crushing. It was so overpowering. Who would want to live like this? I felt my heart beating. I stood outside myself, understanding the painful stories in books and the Bible. Dr. Zhivago, Anna Karenina. I understood a woman fainting from a broken heart, or a man drinking himself into oblivion. I understood the old laws letting a man kill an unfaithful wife and her lover. I understood all the songs about betrayal and loss, Karen Ann. I shook my head. I cried out. Me. Chapter 5. Original Sins. Remembered a philosophy professor who once told our class, "You want to get what you deserve in life? What do you deserve? Hasn't the idea of original sin made any difference to you? Most of us are hoping we don't get what we truly deserve." He was a Catholic philosopher, wore no socks. Karen Ann called around 11:30 that night. "John, how's your hand?" she asked. Now she noticed. She must have been really worried. "Fine. The kids are not mine." "No, Sean got me pregnant the first time it was wonderful. I have those 2 little angels to remind me of him." Was I already dead? I felt myself sinking into sadness and anger. I saw it in myself, felt sorry for myself, but I couldn't stop it. "Are you trying to hurt me?" I asked. "No, of course not," she replied lightly. "It's just that you'll never understand what Sean and I had. It was beyond normal love. He was the kind of man women dream of loving. I consider my time with him the best part of my life. It couldn't be any better." There was something off in her words. She had been having an affair for years, but her story sounded unreal. It felt like she had convinced herself it was true over time. I always thought she was wise and practical. I never saw this side of her. "I thought you loved me." Did those words mean nothing? I was making myself feel worse. I wanted to feel all the pain. I almost wished I had never been born. "Oh no, not nothing. Maybe I just misunderstood my feelings," she said, sounding tired or bored. "It's hard to explain. What Sean and I had was special. We were going to tell you, but then the shooting happened. He was not like you. He was successful, respected, admired, and famous. Talented. Sean said after I became pregnant with Dylan was Sean's middle name, by the way, that he would take care of his son in his will. He later said the same for Hanley. The will reading is after the funeral on Thursday. Hanley was his mother's maiden name. I've told the lawyer I'll meet the family tomorrow. There's a pre-funeral gathering for those in the will. I know nothing about them. Sean never mentioned them. Anyway, they might be happy to know he has 2 kids. Her rushed, breathless words seemed like she was trying too hard to make it sound okay. I guessed he was too busy with her to think about responsibilities and family. A man like that focuses on what he wants first. I felt myself sinking even lower. "How do you know they're his?" I asked, fearing I knew the answer. "I used a diaphragm with you. You never noticed, did you? Then I did DNA tests right after each was born. You never suspected, did you?" She laughed a little but then stopped, realizing it would hurt me. Mrs. Grigsby across the street said she wondered if I had another husband in the summer since Sean was over so much during the day. I had to beg her not to tell you. Oh my God. So the neighbors knew? Her parents knew. Was I the last to find out? Did they all keep it a secret? The kids were not mine, and they were about to inherit a lot of money. Karen Ann had become hateful, and they did it here? In our bed? I asked. I heard her sigh. Yes, many times. He liked the firmer mattress. I had to change the sheets right before you got home. Sean made me feel complete, she said, clearly trying to put me down. I've come to terms with his death. At first I couldn't. I hung up, thinking some grief is beyond words. I knew in my heart that the second miscarriage was Sean's child. The bed, the kids, the betrayal, the secrets, the contraception without my knowledge, the insults, the whole affair. It was too much. That night, I drank too much. I thought about taking my pain pills. I stared at the bottle for a moment, maybe two. I woke up the next day around noon. It was a worse hangover than usual. I remembered the night we cuddled, watching Casablanca. It seemed meaningless now. Only a month ago, I cleaned up, got dressed, and found a divorce lawyer recommended by someone's friend. I took all the papers to him that Wednesday afternoon. He was a heavy man, around 50, with a mustache and longer hair than usual for his age. Still, he looked sharp and successful. "How'd you hurt your hand?" he asked after I came into the office. I sat down and he took the papers behind the desk. He started reading. "I got shot at the hospital," I said. He stopped reading and looked at me. "And she served you divorce papers yesterday?" he asked, shaking his head and whistling. "Oh, I see. The Father Dunstan was killed at the hospital?" he asked. "Yes. You never knew?" "No." He read everything while I sat there, which took an hour. Then he sat back and let out a long breath. "Mr. Buck, this is one of the most heartless, evil things I've ever seen a woman do. It's cruel. You went through all this, and it ends up being the cause of your own divorce," he said, shaking his head. "Her parents said she planned to divorce me and marry him," I said. "Likely story," he said, skeptical. "Guys often make promises, and there's usually nothing there but a fling. You say she's meeting about his will, and the reading is later?" "That's what I was told." "I'd like to be a fly on the wall at that meeting," he said. Then he gave me the tough news. He said I had little legal or practical options. I had been a caring father, but she threatened to claim abuse and other things if I didn't agree to her terms. It's written in legal language, so there's no clear force, but it's there and any lawyer would recognize it. No shared custody, no visitation, out of the house by Friday night, no contact with the kids, but also no alimony or child support. She's expecting a lot from the will and doesn't want you to claim any of it. The kids are so young that she's saying you're not bonded with them, and since there's no biological connection, she wants full authority. The court is likely to agree to prevent years of fights over visitation, custody, alimony, and child support. Cutting the bond now, especially since your job doesn't provide enough support for them. He looked at me and steepled his fingers. "I'll do anything you want, Mr. Buck, but..." "Buck, you can't afford a fight for shared custody or regular visits. You might get to see your kids once a week, maybe with someone watching, especially if she claims abuse. It could get nasty, and some people never recover from false accusations." He stopped talking and looked at me for a moment. "So?" I asked. "What do you want, Mr. Buck?" "My kids, my wife," I begged. "I want my life back." I paused, realizing I was pleading. "But I can't raise them alone. My life is a mess. I'm recently injured and need time to think." I sat there, eyes closed, still hungover, feeling my heartbeat in my head. "I need a few days. I'll contact you by Friday, okay?" "I'll check with you Friday morning if you don't come in by 11, he said. I wondered if he cared. He saw my tired eyes, the half-shaved face, the messy clothes. I stood up and offered my left hand for a handshake. He asked, "How did you get injured?" "I shot my own hand." We laughed. "You're not the first to do something like that." The meeting in Connecticut was probably over by the time I left my lawyer and walked out into the late afternoon sun. There was someone unnoticed in that meeting room in Connecticut. He wore a clerical collar. Early that evening, the phone rang. It was that unnoticed person. "John, this is Mike." Father McAllis, pronounced Mike O'Luce, called himself Mike in private, but it was the first time he did that with me. Yes, sir. I didn't expect a call. I'm in Connecticut, and I wanted to check on you to see if you're all right. I'm busy with Dr. Dunstan's estate. We have insurance and investments involved. The man left a lot of loose ends. I saw your wife here, but we were in different parts of the room. She saw me, but didn't come over. Yes, sir. She sued me for divorce. She claimed our kids were Dunstan's and thinks she has a claim on his property, I explained. There was a long pause, as if he was thinking about what I said. Yes, I figured a lot of that out. Your wife thought Dr. Dunstan was not married, he said. Or at least I believe so. However, all his insurance papers listed a spouse still married to him. Mrs. Dunstan is here with their 2 kids living in the Dunstan family house. The family's been here since the early 1800s. Karen Ann introduced herself as Dr. Dunstan's fiancée, which shocked everyone. His wife walked up to her and slapped her. That's how she found out about the wife. Karen Ann is staying in the same motel I am. Karen Ann must have felt embarrassed. I felt like laughing, but then her embarrassment became mine. He went on. Anyway, everyone got copies of his will. Nothing was kept secret. The official reading is after the funeral. I'll be there, but the lawyers agree on a lot. The insurance money goes to his wife, as per the contract. His private investments will be split among his children, now totaling 4, including your 2. Investments are over $1 million, so it's significant. The surviving parent manages the children's money. The lawyers agree it does not mean the wife controls Dylan's and Hanley's shares, but that Karen Ann would for them. There is no provision in the will for Karen Ann by either name or implication. The wife gets the house and a fund to pay its taxes for around 10 years, our lawyer says. Also, 2 companies will be sold, and the money goes to the family, with the wife getting his share. Oh, she gets the joint checking account, too. He let me feel pleased for a moment. I stopped myself from feeling happy. None of this was good. There was no joy in finding out you were tricked and treated badly. There was no happiness in seeing your marriage ruined by lies. I'm sorry Karen Ann didn't know. Maybe, I said. Things would have turned out differently if she knew more about him. I almost felt that Father Mihal's nodded. He sounded sorry for her. In my experience, cheaters become more disdainful the longer they lie. They see trust as foolishness. They believe their new lovers more. I agree, Father. I think talking about it helped me distance from the pain. In the end, they're pitiful, he said. Always. He paused. She expected more money from Dunstan. That was clear to everyone. What if she drops the suit or asks for support? What will you do? He wanted to know if the marriage could be saved, to live with Karen Ann again, to always wonder if it was marriage or if the cheating continued, to be not the true spouse, but at best an acceptable substitute. I said, I think it's too late for us. She was mean, almost boasting about her affair with him, as if it made her more important. She was ashamed of me. I don't know, Father. I'll talk to my lawyer first. It's hard when your wife turns away. I always thought we'd support each other in tough times. Calmly, he said, I'll see you in a few days or next week. We have important things to discuss about changing your job. I think you'll like them. I hope so anyway. I'll see you when you can come by. Thanks, Father. He left me with something positive to look forward to. Maybe he had studied psychology, among other things. I felt like a great evil had settled into me. I now grasped the idea of being taken over by a demon. It suddenly didn't seem so foolish. How could I feel this much pain without being hurt physically? My hand was nothing compared to this. I felt like I was dying inside, and my own body was causing it, making pain from the strength of a love that was betrayed and never returned. It hurt deep in my chest. If Sean Dunstan were still alive, he could have opened me up and found a lump of solid pain the size of a softball. I prayed to a God I barely believed in. It was more like begging, could I die now? Please? What more do you want? She never loved me. Gave herself to another just 2 months after we moved in together. She looked down on me, took away my family, and threatened to accuse me of horrible things that never happened. My children were not my own. A wave of sick feeling passed through me. How would I tell Mom? Dad? Such hurt was unbearable. I wanted to punch the bookcase with my one good hand. I drank the first of 2 strong drinks then. I thought about Sean Dunstan. Had he ever seen his kids, hold them, kiss them? Had he ever tickled Dylan or looked lovingly into Hanley's eyes? Did Dylan run to him for a hug? Was he jealous of my time with them, or my time with Karen Ann? I fell asleep from too much alcohol and too much pain, with one thought stuck in my mind. All affairs were just make-believe. The day of Sean Dunstan's funeral, I woke up on the couch around 4:30 a.m. I couldn't sleep anymore. I thought I would have to leave my house after one more night. I packed my things. It didn't take long since I didn't own much. Lots of books could be thrown away, but some I kept. I threw clothes into boxes or bins. Our lack of wealth made us live simply. I filled some boxes, hung clothes on the back seat of my car, and put sports equipment in the trunk. A few tools went on the passenger seat and floor. Everything I owned fit in one old Ford. I couldn't avoid it any longer. I drove to my parents' house around 10 a.m. "Mom, Dad, we need to sit and talk. Please," I said, trying to stay calm. I told them everything, that the children were not mine, that I saw no way out, and that Karen Ann was angry and hated me. She was now upset with Dunstan, too. Dad nodded, looking down with a heavy face. Mom looked like her world was falling apart. She sat next to me and hugged me, tears running down her face, but she was silent. Dad suggested coffee, seeing how tired and messy I looked. I told them that Karen Ann had a court order forcing me out of the house. The lawyer said she was ready to accuse me of emotional and maybe other abuse if I didn't do what she wanted and sign the papers. Mom cried out, realizing the grandchildren were never really hers. She understood everything. Mom was the smartest of us. There was little chance she could keep a relationship with them if Karen Ann and I were enemies. I thought we would always be enemies now. I don't think Mom ever recovered from this shock. She aged about 20 years as we talked at the kitchen table, drinking coffee. She lived for many more years, but she became old that day. Her eyes and movements changed. When she started losing her mind 10 years later, she almost seemed to welcome it, as if happy that life's burdens would be elsewhere. She still had things to be happy about by then, like grandchildren, but love was love, and it wasn't about DNA tests. She saw the kids now and then at a market or park, but after a few months she was just a stranger to them. They had other grandparents in New England, even if they weren't close to them. In her last few years, as her mind faded, Mom would walk around the yard talking to herself, plants, or animals, lost in her own world, imagining people from her life. We would gently laugh, talking about it among ourselves, seeing her good life reflected in her condition and wishing that time didn't move on for people like her. I found her one day by a tree, talking. As I got closer, she saw me and asked, "Do you think Dylan and Hanley can come by for lunch?" Karen Ann eventually understood what she did and regretted it, but it didn't change anything. She wasted the love of 3 generations. Chapter 6. 2 priests and a non-believer, I slept badly and for the last time in our house on our couch. For all I knew, Karen Ann and Sean might have used our couch too, but I knew for sure they had used the bed. It was a long night, frequently checking the clock on the TV box, waiting for morning, drifting in and out of sleep. Finally, Friday came. I woke early again, shaved, showered, and dressed in a loose polo shirt. I decided to try to see Dr. Betrayal a day early. The big bandage was dirty, awkward, and hard to manage. I still felt pain, but rarely took a pain pill, and I had gone a night without drinking, so things were probably getting better, at least for my hand. Merciful Lord Church was looking better, windows were fixed, bullet holes were filled, painting was ongoing, and damaged counters, desks, and tables were removed. There were still a few extra police around, in regular uniforms, just keeping an eye on things. I went to my office, which was still the same small room as I had left it. I called to see if I could move my appointment with Dr. Beetle, who was already busy this morning. I left a message, and half an hour later they called back to confirm for 9. I straightened my desk, threw away some old papers, and checked my calendar. A knock came at the door. "Come in," I said. Father Mihalis walked in and closed the door behind him. I stood up. "Father, you move quickly," I said. He held out his left hand and we shook. I learned to manage sleep when I was in seminary. I had to wake up at midnight to pray and then work until 3. I would sleep for another hour or 2, he said, shaking his head. Amazing women, those nuns. I took a late flight last night and got in around 1. I felt he had another reason for coming so early. A morning flight would have been enough for business. We sat and talked. We started with the reading of the will and then talked about other topics. It was just as we discussed. Dunstan has 4 known children now. They will split the investments. Mrs. Buck was almost ignored by the family. They were very rude to her, but the lawyer kept things civil. The kids will get their shares, probably in a few months. My job there ended quickly, but our lawyer is still there to tie up one loose end, which doesn't involve you. He looked directly at me and asked, "What do you plan to do?" I took a deep breath. She hates me. She said she was with him because I was a loser. Their love was so great, I said. I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice and waved my hand to apologize. She bragged about their time together in our bed. She was so spiteful. I was shocked. He shook his head. "This whole thing, I saw it and did nothing," he said. I knew he was seeing different women, but I didn't know Karen Ann was one of them until just before the funeral. I used to think private affairs were not my business. That's a mistake, especially for an institution that stands for morality and goodness. I need to change how I handle these things. I looked at my situation, trying to stay calm. We're in our late 20s, Father. These should be the good years. Babies, building a family, and here I am without one. My wife despises me, and I wonder if I've lost all my dreams. He looked at me and said, "I know you don't have faith, but I pray you find your way to God, John. I met Karen Ann only twice that I remember. I hope she finds her way to a more loving outlook. It seems you will soon be separated from the children you have cared for all your adult life. Don't give up. Fight through this. You're the kind of person who finds a way. I've seen it in you. God is in you." He put his hand on my shoulder. "The God solution, huh?" I said. He always talked about finding calm and thinking things through over time. He didn't believe in quick fixes. We called it his God solution behind his back. "Always," he said, smiling. "Now you said you have to leave your home tonight?" "Yes, everything's in my car. I could go to my parents, but they're so upset that seeing me might make things worse because of Karen Ann and the grandkids. I have a solution. I know someone who needs help paying his bills, but he won't charge you any rent. He might want you to help with chores and share grocery costs. I can probably arrange it today. Give me until the afternoon. Or I'll come find you." "Thanks so much, Father," I said. I had never thought of Landon Michals as my friend, but it seemed he cared, or maybe he was grateful or loyal. "When do you see the doctor about your hand?" he asked. 9 today. "Well, Tara's the best. We'll talk about your job later. There's a lot happening for you and quickly, so I'll just give you the basics. Most large hospitals have a department that handles training. Doctors, nurses, much like what you assist with now, but more formal. I want to create that department and increase your role. Right now, departments handle it on their own, but as we grow, that won't work. We'll talk more. Think about it. I don't know when it would start. Early next year, after we get approval and make some changes. I'll get back to you." "Father, I don't know what to say. This sounds like a real career." He nodded and looked directly at me. "Yes, it does to me, too." Dr. Beadle liked how my hand was healing and made my bandage smaller. I could now wear regular shirts, though buttons would be hard with my offhand. She told me to come back in a week. When we were alone in the room, she said, "I know there's a reason to keep your name out of the news, but I think what you did was very brave. I had thought the terrorists shot you. I didn't know you were the one who stopped the attack. How did you get shot?" "The guy had a gun pointed at the woman's head. I was afraid if I shot him in the head, he'd pull the trigger. So I knocked the gun up and shot him. The bullet went through him and hit my hand." She shook her head. "And you still shot the other guy? You're a hero, John. You saved a lot of us. I hope one day people can know. I really do." "Kind words," I replied, smiling. "If I were just a little more careful, I might have avoided shooting myself. Thanks for everything, Tara. I'll be back in a week." My phone rang as I returned to my office. It was turning into a busy Friday, and I hadn't done any of my usual work. "Hello? John?" It was Karen Ann. I stayed silent for a moment. "John? I heard you. Say what you have to say." "I shouldn't have said what I did, John." We sat in silence for a moment. Then I finally spoke. "I used to think so highly of you, Karen Ann. I told everyone I had married the best person I'd ever met. I admired you." She said, "I know I made mistakes, but we can still fix this if we just—" "Stop, Karen Ann. No honest man could stay in a marriage knowing how you feel about him. There's nothing left to say. What do you want from me? What's left to build on? I asked. I can't stay married to you. You threatened to lie about me. But my voice broke and my mouth kept moving. I tried to sound firm, but I had no voice. She replied, John, you're being so unreasonable. Don't you care about the kids? At the mention of the kids, I found my voice. Unreasonable? The issue is being truthful. You turned the kids into weapons and tried to cut me out. You threatened to make up terrible lies about me. That's not rational. A father does what's right for his family even when it's hard. It's tough for me, but I must. I'll sign the papers in a few minutes. She said, You're cruel. My voice was strong now, as I understood my feelings and our situation. Losing my family hurts. You tore us apart. How could you even think of lying about abuse? No one loves those children more than I do, not even you. I paused. Then I said, Did Dunstan ever know them? Did he play with Dylan? There was silence. Sometimes silence can be so loud. This was one of those times. I realized Dunstan didn't care about the kids. His loss. Where do we go from here, John? She asked. For the first time, I think she realized the damage was done. You are like Ugolino. You brought Ruggieri into our lives. I stopped myself from saying more out of anger. May God forgive you for that, I said. I shook my head and the phone was silent. I wondered why she was still listening. Was it remorse, loss, hopelessness, single motherhood? The kids still have a chance. Maybe you can give them a good life, I said quietly and angrily. But do me 2 favors. First, stop using my name. The kids can keep it. You made fun of it enough. I paused. I imagined her nodding on the other end of the line. She said, You said 2 favors. Yeah, take responsibility for this mess you called a marriage and forget about me. She said nothing. There was a long period of silence. I never used such language even when I was a Marine. I heard her breathing. I stayed on the line for a bit to let her know I was still there. Eventually, I heard her hang up. I immediately called my lawyer and told him I had decided to sign the papers. I drove to his office. He welcomed me with a left-handed shake. Less bandages, huh? He said. Yeah. My wife called, wanted to fix things, I think, but it's too late. We sat down and I felt a wave of emotion. Low expectations shouldn't be why we stay married. He nodded and pulled out the papers marked for me to sign. He said, It wouldn't work. A man can't move past knowing his wife truly loves someone else, even if it's just for the kids. I nodded and said, She has some money now. I signed with my left hand, making messy marks, holding back tears, feeling my eyes shine. He said, Might be for the best, then. I nodded, unable to talk. I took off my wedding ring and put it on the table. I'll take care of everything. In about a month, it'll be over. I'll let you know when the court finalizes it. I stood and held out my left hand. We shook. I shook my head because I didn't trust myself to speak. Something inside me broke when I signed those papers. My love had been real. You never fully recover from the end of a family, even a rocky one. I returned to the hospital around 1 and saw Father Michaels escorting some people to my office. He saw me and said, Mr. Buck, these people wanted to speak with you. I recognized Tony Spagnol, his mother Marilyn, and a man I hadn't met. Tony rushed into my arms. His mom followed and hugged me next. Hello, hello, I said, laughing and hugging them back. Mrs. Spagnol said, We wanted to thank you for helping us. This is my husband, Cal. Cal was standing with some difficulty. I held out my left hand. John Buck, I said. Cal Spagnol, he replied. He pronounced it like spaniel, clearing up a small mystery, and we shook left-handed. He was using a crutch with his right hand. We were here to take Cal home that morning when the terrorists came in. He had knee surgery, she said. I hope everyone is doing well, I said. Father Michaels was smiling. The Spaniels had chosen not to give their names to the public, just in case. We talked for a few minutes. Cal asked about my hand, and I explained what happened. He shook his head, realizing my injury was for his wife. Marilyn and Tony began to leave. Cal leaned into me and said, Thank God for what you did, Buck. I do. I thank him. And you. I can never repay you. He shook his head, and then my hand with both of his, trapping the crutch under his arm. I shook my head. I'd do it again. So would you if you'd been there. Cal nodded. Marilyn, Cal, and Tony left. Father Michaels was smiling as they walked away, helping me fight my sadness. "Thanks, Mike," I said quietly. No one else could hear. He smiled at the nickname. "Maybe I can get through this after all. We can get you counseling, you know. No charge." "Hospital can." I shook my head. "No, you're already helping a lot. I talked to Karen Ann a few hours ago. She tried to make things right, but it's too late for that." I signed the papers. He nodded. "I hate seeing marriages break up. I dislike divorce. I believe two loving people can always work things out in time with God's help. I really believe it." He sighed and looked at me kindly. "But not every marriage has two loving people. Sometimes only one person is loving enough for both, and those marriages end long before the couples realize it." "It's hard to—" I stopped, not sure what to say, and just shook my head. I felt awkward to show emotions in front of my boss. "Let's take a ride," he said, ignoring my feelings. "I'll drive." He drove us just a mile down the street. "Found you a place. No rent. You pay utilities up to $300 and he'll cover the rest. You get a third of an old Gothic house. Your own bathroom, your own entrance, or use the shared one, use of the common rooms like the kitchen and living room. The fireplaces work. It's in good shape." "Sounds great, Father." I was surprised. He stopped behind the local Catholic church, Our Merciful God Parish. In sky gray, everything Catholic is named Our Merciful something, God, Savior, Lord, Mother. "Out," he said, and I got out. I started to laugh as I understood what he was saying. With all the sadness of the shooting, the hurt hand, the divorce, and losing the kids, I needed to laugh. "Why are you laughing? You got me an apartment in a priest's house? A rectory? Yeah, what's the big deal? It'll save everyone money. Come on, Phil's inside. He's your housemate." I was still laughing as we climbed the steps. "I guess I don't have to worry about him bringing people home late at night?" "Probably not. But stay alert." We knocked on the door. I moved to my new place. I had a separate bedroom in an old spooky house built in the late 1800s. Dark wood floors and trim chair rails, thick walls, chandeliers, two fireplaces, one in the living room, the other in my bedroom, comfy chairs, and a light smell of old cigar smoke. A large, sturdy four-poster bed looked like it could survive a war. The building was made for 3 priests back when large parishes could afford them. It was the nicest place I had ever lived in. Everything was solid 19th century quality, still good in the 21st. It was old but nice. I pictured a writer like Conan Doyle working at the desk or Lincoln staring at the fireplace. There were paintings everywhere. Jesus looked down from some walls, Mary or Joseph from others. Various saints' portraits were around. There was Saint Drogo, patron of the unattractive. I wondered if that painting was hung as a joke. I had never heard of the Infant of Prague or St. Margaret of Chichester. I began to understand Catholic guilt. Father Philip was older and sharp. The local priest moved here from another part of the diocese. I had access to the whole house, my own bathroom, and a woman would clean once a week. I had to cook for Father and me when I could. After one meal, Father decided to cook for both of us. Father Philip said he was an alcoholic, so I was not to have alcohol in the house. I told him that was fine. I was out of whiskey anyway. With this simple rule, I avoided drinking. From that busy Friday, my life began to calm down. The crises of violence, confrontations, family problems, and tough choices were hopefully over. Some of the credit went to the 2 priests who helped a non-Catholic like me. Part of it was giving me time and space. The God solution. Think about it, pray, consider your options, discuss it with people who can help, and you will find a solution. If you drop the God part, most people would agree anyway. Calm down, think it through, learn what you can, talk it over, and make a choice. Then watch how it goes and adjust as needed. It was practically the scientific method. Father Philip and I talked on evenings when he was free. He was 67, had served in the Gulf War, and had performed many baptisms, weddings, and last rites. He played poker well and liked to drink, which had been his downfall. He was assigned to Merciful God after getting sober. It was a good assignment, and he had been here for 13 years. He didn't have long left one way or another. His health wasn't good, and it was time for him to retire. He told me about the problems he had handled over the years. He loved the relationship with the parish school. He was calmly, and he said easily, celibate. We talked about our work, our lives, baseball, world peace, soccer, football, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and argued about the Gospel of Thomas. Anything. He got me to read parts of Gospels, novels. He had me look under the old dining room table, and there were the names of every priest to serve in the parish and live in the house, written in pencil. Over 100 years of priests were listed there. We talked about it. We discuss a line or a book for hours on some nice evenings. My evenings ended in peace, reading, and friendly conversation. Thankfully, we were both Reds fans. I grew to love those evenings. Sometimes he smoked a cigar on the porch, but he said he never did it inside. I didn't talk about my coming divorce, and I didn't tell him about my part in the shootings either. June ended, and July got even hotter. Our air conditioning worked hard, but I still needed a fan upstairs at night to sleep. With the fan, it was comfortable. I went back to work during regular hours, and in the second week of July, Father Michaels came in to talk about my job. He sat across from me. "I've been looking for ways to keep you here at the hospital. It's a shame to lose good people because there's no clear career path in a growing hospital. John, if you're interested, I'd like to suggest some ideas to the board," he said. I was touched. He was trying to help me, acting like I had options. "I'd like to send you to a program in Cleveland for new hospital administrators. They teach about all the rules for licensing, accrediting, and certifying in different medical fields. They also cover hospital and doctor contracts. This program has connections worldwide. Sending a doctor to be trained shouldn't mean we lose the benefit of that training. Hopefully, when you return, we can set up a program to help doctors identify their strengths and weaknesses. Then we can include nurses and other professionals. We need to build ongoing training into our contracts, so our best doctors stay here in Sky Gray with their families. That idea took a big hit with the massacre." He shook his head. I realized he would have to fight to prove Sky Gray was a good place for families. He continued, "The program will get you some graduate credits. After Cleveland, I want you to start a course in health administration or hospital management. There are several programs that would help, or maybe a course in hospital law. Down the road, maybe even a sabbatical for a master's degree." "You want me to work towards a degree, Father?" I asked. "I do. You'll have choices to make if you want a career here at Merciful God. As we start a new department, I don't see how one person could handle it alone. Bigger hospitals have departments to help doctors and nurses maintain or improve their ratings. We'd have to add an assistant once your training is over, then 1 or 2 more people soon after. I could help you with this, but some of it will be like what you are doing now, just more intense. We'll make sure you finish a program in hospital management, personnel, or a related field like law. A law degree even makes sense." I had never been excited about my job before. "The next step is writing a proposal. Could you get me started by looking into University Hospital in Cincinnati? They have many doctors and a great reputation. Find out how they do things, take notes, and then write a short essay. The notes don't have to be fancy, but make the essay good. I might use it when I talk to the board. Maybe a week for the first draft. If you need more time, let me know. You'll need to meet with them and interview people. Okay?" I smiled. "Yes, sir. I'll call as soon as you leave. Send me notes first every day, by email or paper as often as you can. I can help with phone calls if needed." I looked at him and thought about his intentions. I was sure he knew what this job would require. It sounded like positions he had held early in his career. He was training me and making sure I learned how a professional human resources department worked. It seemed he had faith in me and wanted to guide me into a career. "Great, sir. I know some people in that department at UC. I'll call them right away." So, my new job began. I was excited but scared I might be in over my head. But several people were helping me. I had my hand checked again by Dr. Betrayal. She said it was much better and one of her best jobs. She told me to keep wrapping it for the rest of the summer. She also gave me some ointment to help it heal and prevent infections. The scars looked nasty, and I wondered if I'd ever be able to make a fist. But I could move all my fingers with some pain. Weeks and then a month passed since the shooting. Hot days turned into hot nights. I didn't see the children or Karen Ann. Life felt comfortable but empty. Being anonymous suited me. But without my kids or wife, I felt lonely in a way that no friendly priest could fix. Indeed, I had always been anonymous. Apart from 2 Homeland investigators and the 2 priests, I didn't think anyone knew where I lived, not even my parents. The media still speculated about who had killed the terrorists. The shadowy YouTube cell phone video was brightened and enhanced so much that I thought I could recognize myself, but I didn't think anyone else could. No one had ever seen me as that kind of person, which helped me stay anonymous. The video clearly showed when the bullet hit my right hand. Luckily, I was just one of several people wounded in the arm or hand, so I didn't stand out. The mayor of Sky Gray called me a hero and a humble man in an interview. Special Agent Remark was interviewed once and just said, "The man's identity will not be revealed." I sat on the porch one night with Father Phil and wondered how it would all turn out. We talked about marriage, my divorce, and what was right. He didn't judge. He didn't like divorce, but he said the sin was in being with someone else outside the marriage. For the church, the divorce didn't count. He suggested a book by Evelyn Waugh about a divorced Catholic. Another to read, I thought. Phil always had a book to recommend. This one was a comedy, though a quiet one, about World War II. There was no humor in my marriage ending. On July 24th, the divorce was final. I didn't even go to the hearing. My lawyer brought the papers to the hospital. The judge asked why my name was so messy. My lawyer explained I'd been hurt in the hospital. The judge had words for my ex-wife but didn't change anything. She said nothing, and her lawyer was upset. "Goodbye to all that," I said, quoting a book title. We shook left hands. "Good luck, John. I'm really sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted in life," my lawyer said. I think he understood. I wasn't married anymore. I drove to my parents' house and showed them the papers. Mom nodded and said nothing. Dad did the same. I hugged them and left after a few minutes. There was nothing to say or do. Dylan and Hanley weren't mine, if they ever had been. The greatest happiness in life, Lord Byron said, is knowing we are loved. Did Karen Ann ever love me? Dylan was conceived 2 months after we started living together. We weren't in trouble financially. We would soon be cramped with another child, but we managed with Dylan. Had I ever been loved? Only one answer. No. A big no. That night, Phil and I talked about the divorce being final. I felt sad. He called Father Mike, and we all sat on the porch, looking at the stars and sipping iced tea. We talked about Karen Ann and the kids, and how I couldn't help them anymore. I raised my glass. A toast. To celebrating a divorce with 1 single and 2 in vow of celibacy, I said. We laughed and clinked glasses. I decided to tell Phil the details of my marriage. I sipped my tea and waved my hand, meaning something was gone. After the tragedy, my wife confessed she had a long affair with one of the victims, Sean Dunstan, the surgeon. She said she didn't know if she ever loved me. She called me a loser. My children aren't mine. I love them, but I'm not their biological father. I was told I had little legal ground to fight for custody or even visits. My wife threatened to claim I had hurt them or her. After what happened, it was too much. I had nowhere to go. Father Mike led me here. I sipped again. I am truly grateful, Father. You're not Catholic? He asked. No, I'm not really anything. Oh, you are, John, he said. Anyone who knows you can see it. Not my ex-wife, I thought, but I appreciated his effort. I need to go, Mike said, standing. Thank you for a unique divorce party. I've never been to one before. John, I'll see you tomorrow. He walked towards the hospital. He was never really done for the day. Wonderful, I thought. Suffering brings us closer to God, they said. I tried to calm my mind. Phil spoke quietly. So this Dunstan, was he a good doctor? It was in the papers that he was one of the victims. Yeah, a great doctor, but... Phil sat quietly holding his iced tea. 2 broken marriages, yours and his, 2 children not acknowledged as yours, living far from his other children and wife, apparently other affairs. He sipped his tea. We looked at Venus, bright in the early evening sky. He saved many lives with his surgery, I said after a while. Phil nodded. There's that. I'm sure even Peter kept track of it all. Phil could have a dry sense of humor. About a week later in August, Phil and I talked on the porch again. He changed the subject. John, he began, I've watched you. Your sadness is still strong. The divorce was hard, but that's not all, right? I nodded as it got darker. I'm a small-time hospital manager, Father. I make less than a teacher, and there's no advancement. Father Mike wants to expand my job. I'm excited but scared I won't do well, or it won't mean much, or they'll find someone better. I've written 2 essays and notes for 2 hospital programs we will start. And I miss the kids. Family life. Hanley is 4 months old and Dylan is 2 years. I don't want my next wife to expect too little. If I have a next wife. My mind is a mess of pain, I guess. Phil nodded. Your heart too, he said softly. The wind was hot and we didn't cool down on the porch. I heard music from a house across the street. Phil rocked gently in his chair. I lounged in an Adirondack chair, sweating as the heat lingered. Phil finished his tea. It's hot tonight, isn't it? He said. Yeah, I replied. My iced tea was gone. Phil looked down, thinking, then looked at me. Would you come to Mass with me tomorrow, John? It's my early one with a few old men and women. It would mean a lot to me. I've never been to Mass before. I don't believe, Father. He smiled and laughed softly. Oh, it's not so bad. We even call it a celebration. What else are you doing at 6:30? I'll wake you. It was 5:30 when Philip knocked on my door. John, we leave at 6. Mass at 6:30 in the building. The church was only 50 feet from the back door of the rectory, so I was up with plenty of time. I even showered and shaved. I wrapped my hand again with clean bandages. We arrived at 6:05, and Philip went to get ready. Catholic clergy have special clothes and things to do for every occasion. I sat in a pew, the only person there, and even knelt for a bit on the padded kneeler and prayed. It was not awful, actually pleasant, if very early. A few older men came in, one with a walker. 2 older women, a young man about 25, and a small woman around 30 eventually arrived. Father entered and Mass began. Philip went through the ritual quickly. He had no helpers, called servers, I learned, so he did all the tasks himself. He gave a sermon, and I listened. I think he meant this part for me, and later found out he meant it for several of us. There are times when good men or women are stuck. There is deceit in their lives, betrayal, failure. There seems to be no love for these good people, and it is easy to feel hopeless. Hopelessness is not the worst thing. Perhaps they are even right. It is a time for hopelessness, but don't let it be the end. There's something good for you after it. Come out of it. Find someone to love. Help someone find love. There is goodness, there is joy. There is life for all of us. Life itself is a gift of God. Accept that it's good, that hopelessness ends, and there will be love. You will find the best way if you're open to love. He looked at me and quoted Hugo. It is nothing to die. It is terrifying not to live. I'd never thought of that idea, including responsibility. Had Dunstan never lived or lived only partially? Was I being asked to live fully? It's hard to realize the depth with which many have looked at morality, religion, or life. Phil was one I now saw. He seemed like an old guy with his heart on his sleeve, reading Garcia Marquez or John Galsworthy. But there was reason in his ideas. Philosophy and learning beyond Scripture were inside every sermon. I wondered later if he really believed in all the rules of his church, or if he accepted them because he saw such a moral goodness at its heart. When Mass ended, Father Philip simply announced it, walked down the center aisle to the back of the nave, and began to speak with the people. There was laughter and friendship in this large, mostly empty Catholic building. I met Joe and Richard, 2 veterans from Korea and Vietnam, who welcomed me with left-hand shakes. I just said I'd injured my hand at work. They were impressed I'd been in the service and felt I was lucky to have missed combat. Sybil was an older woman from Florida. I later learned she moved to Sky Gray when her husband ended his life. The young man left immediately, probably to get to work on time. Maria was the woman near my age, red-haired with a kind but shy look. She was very small, almost tiny, and carried herself as if she wanted to be smaller. She was likely the most beautiful woman in any room. Philip took her right hand in both of his, as if he thought she might bolt, whispered something to her, and walked with her to me. I thought for a second, yes, she was shaking, just a bit. Maria Gray, this is John Buck, Philip said. She looked at me with her head slightly down, maybe wanting to lower her eyes to the floor. Hello, John. Maria, my pleasure, I said, and I held my left hand out to her. She looked at my bandaged hand and then hesitantly reached her left to mine, and we shook hands. It was a big moment for her, and Philip knew it, foresaw it, and arranged it. He held her right hand tightly during the introduction, not letting her get away. Father nodded and found someone else to speak with, so he left us alone and we talked for a few minutes. She spoke very quietly at first, forcing her eyes to mine with visible effort. She worked weekdays 7:30 to 3:30 cleaning rooms at a motel, so this early mass was not inconvenient. I asked her if she came every week, and she said she had only been once before, last week. Father had asked her to return, saying he had someone he wanted her to meet. It took me a second to realize he'd planned this for a week. I looked at him. I thought, "You clever man, you. She's beautiful and hurting, and you wanted us to meet." Phil, the priest and matchmaker, a new respect for old Catholic priests was planted at that moment. "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight, after your work?" I asked. She looked confused at first, but then raised her eyes to mine and said, determinedly, firmly, as if it took great effort or some moral courage, very, very quietly, "Yes, I'd like that. Shall we meet someplace, or could you pick me up? I don't have a car myself." "I'll pick you up. May I have your address? I'll come about 7. "Good. I'll be ready." She wrote her address on a piece of paper she'd pulled from her purse. "I must go now. Thanks so much for asking me. See you at 7? "Count on it." Father Phil and I walked back to the rectory together then. "What do you know about Maria?" I asked him. "She said she hasn't been coming to Friday Mass much." "Oh, but her family has been parishioners for a long time. In fact, her family first settled Sky Gray. Her father works for the power company and her mother runs a daycare center for grade school kids. Good people. Maria was terribly hurt as a young woman and she has trouble meeting people and bonding. I believe she sees a therapist." "What does that mean? How hurt?" "When she was 21 or so, she was attacked by some young men. She became very hesitant about men after that." Chapter 7. Maria at 7. I found myself standing in front of an old house in the older part of Sky Gray. The house was painted white, and its windows had a wavy look like they were very old. There was a bay window near the porch which had space for a swing. It was a tall house with a red roof made of tin. I knocked on the door. A large man, about 55 years old, answered. He wore a short-sleeved khaki shirt that looked freshly clean, blue work pants with a Dickies tag, and running shoes. He didn't seem the running type, though. "John?" he asked. "Yes, sir, I'm here to see Maria." Come in, come in." He welcomed me, holding the door open. "I'm Tom Gray." I held up my hand, which was bandaged. "Hurt my hand," I said, and we shook hands left-handed. Inside, the air conditioning was a huge relief from the hot August weather. He guided me to a chair in the living room. "Sally," he called, "John's here." A small woman with red hair and pale skin, just like Maria, walked in. "John, pleased to meet you. What's your last name?" "Buck, John Buck." We shook hands left to right because of my bandage. She held on for a few seconds longer, making the meeting feel special. "We're happy to meet you, John. Sit down. Would you like something to drink? Maybe a soft drink or water?" she offered. We sat down while we waited. "No, thank you. We should probably get going soon." The Gray house felt very lived in. Older furniture that looked a bit worn out, mismatched chairs at the kitchen table, and that kind of thing. "So what do you do, John?" Tom asked, very interested, probably because he didn't see Maria dating much. "I work at Merciful Lord Hospital. I'm an administrator. I organize meetings for doctors, arrange lectures, help keep everyone licensed, that sort of thing," I explained. Tom nodded, then asked, "How did you hurt your hand?" "In the shooting 2 months ago," I said. They both perked up. "Oh, you were involved in that?" Sally asked. "Somewhat. We're not supposed to say much, to protect people who might be in danger," I said. I had learned to steer people away from prying too much. "Well, I just want Maria to be safe," Tom said, trying to be polite. "If you're concerned, I can." I started, but was interrupted. From behind me, a voice said firmly, "Don't even think of leaving." It was Maria. I stood and turned around. She was wearing a blue sundress. Her red hair touched her shoulders and was combed back. She seemed more confident at home. She smiled. "I wasn't planning to. You look beautiful, Maria," I said, unable to stop staring. "Yes, she does," her mother added. We all admired her for a moment. "I made reservations," I said. "We should be heading out. Maybe we can talk more when we return." Tom said, "I'd like that." "We're just going to a simple dinner not far from here." And if you're worried, you can call Father Phil. He knows me well. I've been staying at his rectory since late June. Sally said, "You're the one?" At Mass, they mentioned he had a new boarder but didn't give a name. "Of course, son," Tom said, standing next to Sally now. "Take care of our girl." Sally looked at Maria. "Do you have your phone and emergency numbers?" Maria nodded and looked away. "Have a nice time," Sally said, and Tom nodded. He gave me a serious look. He truly cared about Maria. We headed out. During dinner, I found out what those emergency numbers were. We went to an Italian restaurant chain, nothing too fancy. It wasn't hard to find, just outside town near Greenville. Despite the crowd, our table was ready on time. We talked about her and why the priest had brought us together. She explained that after the attack 8 years ago, she went into a deep depression, became afraid to go outside, and found it hard to even talk on the phone. There were years of therapy with pills for anxiety and depression. She had never thought about ending her life, but she stayed closed off at home. After about 3 years of once-a-week therapy, she began to run. She had been a good runner in high school. At first, her parents followed her on a bike or in a car. After a while, they stopped, and she ran alone, always in safe, open areas during the day. Then 2 years ago, she got a job at a motel. Now, she went out about once a week to a store or mall, usually with her mother, but sometimes someone else would drop her off and pick her up. She walked to church by herself even though it was 3 blocks away. She still went to therapy every week. "So you know why the father introduced me to you? Why did he introduce you to me?" she asked. "Fair enough. It was harder for me to talk about my marriage than the attack. I was married until this week. After the hospital attack, my wife confessed she had a 3-year-long affair with one of the victims. She hoped he would take care of her financially. She said she had never truly loved me. Anyway, it turns out neither of our children." I had to stop talking. My voice shook and Maria touched my hand. Her hand was pale and small with long fingers. I whispered, "Neither one was mine. Not by blood. They are 2 years old and the baby is 4 months. I paused, then spoke louder. "She sued for divorce. I couldn't fight for the children because they weren't mine by blood. Her lawyer said she would say I was abusive if I didn't agree to the divorce. In the end, my wife got what she wanted. She thought she'd get money from the guy, but he left her nothing. The kids got some money, though. She'll struggle to pay her bills unless she uses their money or gets a summer job, or remarries soon. She's a teacher. I don't pay her or support the kids." I was quiet then, upset but not crying. "Do you love the kids?" "Yes," I said softly, my face showing my pain. "But I don't think it's good for me anymore. Dylan is the older boy and Hanley is the girl. Their father was a doctor at my hospital. He was seeing many women and had a wife and kids in New England. My wife didn't know. They were together for almost 3 years. She was mean when she told me about it. She didn't know he was leading her on. The kids probably won't remember me much if Hanley ever did. I don't know what's best for them. Should I say I thought about taking them away in the night? Running off to Africa, the Amazon, or maybe Tallahassee?" We sat in silence, looking at each other. She spoke first. "You know I'm not looking for something quick, John. If it didn't work out, it would be hard." "And I don't want that either," I said, pausing. "We'll just let things happen naturally. No pressure." We drank some wine and didn't mind the silences. I held her hand as we walked up to her front door. She said, "I'd kiss you goodnight, but I'm sure Mom and Dad want to talk to you. Then kiss me now." She did. Thin girls can have soft lips and their arms can be strong, or maybe it's just redheads. For once, I felt tall and I liked it. I told her parents the story of the shooting briefly, drinking beer as the moon rose. I said I had shot my hand by accident. They smiled at that, and it didn't feel silly. I sat in one of the big, comfy chairs by the fire. After a few minutes, Maria came and sat on the arm of my chair, putting an arm around me. I finished the story. "The end result is my hand is slightly damaged, but that night it was over," I said. Tom didn't look convinced. "You're right-handed?" I nodded. I tilted my head at him. "So how?" He knew. He had seen the video of me using my left hand to shoot. He probably noticed my right hand jerk as the bullet hit it. He looked at me and tried not to comment, keeping his thoughts to himself. He nodded slightly. I spoke up. It was after 11, late enough for a first date. "Mr. Gray, Mrs. Gray, I know Maria's family founded this town. I'd love to hear that story. I'm leaving now. I hope you don't mind me seeing Maria if she wants to see me. Maria, I'll be in touch. Very soon, I said, smiling. She walked me to the door and closed it behind me. Early August can be very hot in Ohio, even at night. By the time I got to my car, I was sweating. It was a lesson. All relationships face challenges. We met in the morning, shared our worries, and kissed. That was enough for one day. I had lost Karen Ann, Dylan, and Hanley. Nothing was certain. I needed something human, something emotional to be strong. Maybe for it to last. So began the easy part of dating Maria Gray. I let some days pass. I called her and we talked for a few minutes on Sunday. I saw her running on Tuesday afternoon. I called her parents on Wednesday to ask if I could pick her up from work, just to talk. Her mom thought it was nice of me, but said Maria might be a bit dirty from work. I'm sure she looks beautiful even when dirty, I said. Her mom sounded happy and told me where to park so I wouldn't miss her. I got there a few minutes early and leaned against my car so she'd see me. At 3:35, she came out with another woman laughing. She saw me and stopped. Her hand went to her hair and her friend noticed and looked at me. Maria smiled and shook her head. She said something to her friend, took her hand, and walked towards me. "Hello, I thought I'd give you a ride home," I said as they came closer. "Do you have room for Eva?" "Eva, this is John Buck." "John, this is Eva Dominguez Lopez Villardo," or something like that, Maria said, laughing. I held out my left hand to Eva, who looked about 40 years old. "Nice to meet you, Eva," I said. She said, "So you're the guy Maria's been talking about. I'm glad to hear that. Get in, ladies, and tell me where to go." They laughed a lot, and I saw a more open side of Maria. They talked about work, funny things that happened, their bosses' jokes, their parents, the church, and Eva's kids. Eva always found reasons to laugh. This made Maria's eyes shine and her voice light up. Maria was fragile, like she could break at any moment. She spoke very softly, especially at the start of a conversation. Every day she fought the urge to withdraw. She often didn't want to do anything. Not work, not eat, not get dressed, not move, not watch TV, not read, not clean, not play. Nothing. Starting something was the hardest part. Through many talks with her and her mother, I learned that a terrible event had changed her life. 1. I tried to see Maria every other day, so she knew she could count on me but didn't feel pressured. I would show up to drive her home, wave as she jogged by a spot we both knew, or just call her on the phone. With time, I'd visit her unannounced. Her mom was always happy to see me, I think. Or we'd meet at an ice cream shop or Starbucks. We went to 2 Dayton Dragons baseball games as their season ended. I took her to a show in Cincinnati on a Sunday afternoon, so we weren't in the city after dark. She invited me to a wedding of one of her cousins. We danced. I felt how nice it was to hold her close. She was small and light. I reacted to her, and I think it surprised her. For the next 2 months, she introduced me to her family and even an old high school boyfriend. I felt jealous, even though 12 years had passed, and he was married with a child. Almost 3 months after the hospital attack, Homeland Security agents arrested all known members of the Islamic World Caliphate in the United States. 14 people were arrested in Minneapolis, Los Angeles, Detroit, and a farm near Fort Wayne, Indiana. They found weapons, explosives, and equipment on the farm. Homeland Security acted because they had evidence another attack was planned soon, though they didn't know exactly when or where. This group was small and radical, mainly from the Middle East, but wanted to spread terror in America. Their leader, Ahil Ali, tried to fight the federal agents in Minneapolis but ran out of ammo and was captured. 2 members died fighting at the farm, but the others were captured while still in bed. The agents were confident they had caught the entire group in the U.S., though the other half remained in the Middle East. This group hoped to gain the status of Al-Qaeda one day. The day after the arrests, I got a call from Remark. "Mr. Buck? This is Special Agent Remark." "Yes, don't you ever get tired of saying Special Agent all the time? You'd think you'd have to explain what makes you special." He laughed. "Yeah, but I'm not allowed to just say agent or officer. It's a rule. I have good news. You should see it on the news. We think we've arrested all the members of that group that attacked your hospital. The ones in the country, at least. We'll talk about your anonymity at a meeting tomorrow, but it's likely to be lifted. You're probably not in any more danger than anyone else. I'll call after the meeting to let you know what's decided." "Good. I like the anonymity, but that is good news. You guys have been working hard. Yes, very true. I haven't slept a full night in 2 months. He paused a moment. Did you ever tell your wife that you shot them? No. She divorced me a week after the shooting. Thanks for calling and let me know what happens. And get some sleep. Sure thing, Mr. Buck. Mr. Buck? He asked. Yeah? Amazing, really. What you did. You saved the hostages and took out the threat in seconds. We enhanced a video that showed it, but couldn't get the audio right. What did you yell? And then you said something like, I think it was that old Marine yell, oorah or something. Then I said, you messed with the wrong Marine. Heard it in a movie. I was pumped. Sounds like it. The guys have been laughing about it. Nothing special. Thanks, Eric. Tomorrow. Click. The next day, Remark called around 10 a.m. and said all files on Merciful Lord except one classified file would be opened right away. I thanked him. I was grateful for all the effort that led to the arrests and was glad they thought they got everyone dangerous. I wondered how they could be so sure. I guessed they were as sure as anyone could be. It turned out they missed one. He was hiding, scared, and not far away. He was probably very worried he would be next. Eventually, I talked to Remark again. He explained how careful and thorough they were in building their case. It took a lot of time and effort. They used methods to map out connections between people. It was like how teachers create seating charts in classrooms. Diagrams covered the walls, showing links between individuals. Some diagrams pointed to dangerous people, and others were false leads. This method worked well in many cases, catching most terrorists. Agents and analysts were careful and made sure no contact was missed. They followed every lead, from a store clerk to a friend of a friend. This process was tiring and went on day and night. Maybe it was because of this exhaustion that one IWC supporter stayed hidden and angry. There was only one email mentioning this person, and it was confusing. It was overlooked among thousands of other emails. The email contained one word, YAS, which a Homeland Security analyst thought was a typo for yes. They assumed it referred to money, as it often did, but this time Yas was a person. Yas was young, untrained, and alone. Homeland Security later learned Yas was Yusef's younger brother. He wasn't in Ohio. He was an hour and a half from Indianapolis. Yas was heartbroken when his brother died with so few casualties in Sky Gray, and when his friends were arrested. He continued working as a night clerk at a motel, but had no money for college. He hid, thinking the U.S. government was after him. He kept his brother's pistol by his bed, had a fake ID, and an expired student visa. Homeland Security made a serious but honest mistake. Yassin was almost unknown to the IWC. When he stopped contacting his IWC contact in Saudi Arabia, they assumed he was captured or dead. Yassin hid for 15 months. Eventually, he contacted friends and family in the Middle East using the internet, being very careful. Bill Meyer and Randy Winger were the guards who faced the killers in the cafeteria that terrible morning. I found them down the hall near their usual spot, right after I got off the phone with Remark. I told them the files were being opened, and we talked about losing anonymity. They agreed to keep my name private, as I wished. But I realized that wasn't needed anymore. My name would be in the police reports for all to see. I asked them to be honest and not exaggerate anything. I thought they stopped the killings by confronting the attackers. I would say so if asked, but planned to avoid interviews as they never seemed to help. I wondered if I would be known for my desperate act. Did I want to be known? I realized much of my life I hid behind being humble. It let me be shy and avoid arguments. I could avoid confrontation and strong beliefs. I wasn't known as a Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, religious or atheist. I was just a nice guy who avoided fighting or taking strong stands. Maybe I joined the Marines because I wanted to change that part of me. I went home to my parents. We sat at the table and talked about what happened. I explained what I did and how I injured my hand. Mom seemed proud, and Dad was amazed. As I talked, Dad got quiet, stood up, and put his hand on my shoulder. It touched me deeply. He said, "Reporters will go after Karen Ann. Tell her." Suddenly I realized the divorce might become gossip. He was right. I hadn't talked to her since before the divorce. I wondered how she would react. I called her, but she didn't answer. I left a message. "Karen Ann, I need to talk to you right away about the hospital shooting. Please call me." She was probably in class. The new school year had started. There were other people who needed to know before the media did. I left my parents' house and drove to Maria's parents' place. I knocked on the door and Mrs. Gray answered. "John, I didn't expect you. Come in, please," she said. "I need to talk to you about something important, ma'am," I said. "It's not bad, but it can't wait." I stepped inside. "Of course," she said, looking worried. "Maria's at work. Tom isn't here. What is it?" She looked very concerned. "They are opening the files on the hospital shooting today. Most attackers have been arrested in America. I didn't tell you everything before. I shot 2 terrorists, and I also shot my own hand." She looked at me, relieved it wasn't about Maria. She was still puzzled by the news. "Tom said you shot your right hand and you are right-handed," she began. "He said, 'Sal, he wasn't telling us everything. Something else happened.'" She paused. "Now I understand." "There will be a media frenzy," I said. "They'll soon know my name, maybe even have my picture." I waited for her to process this. "They might find out Maria is my girlfriend." She looked at me, smiling, thinking about it. "You have no idea how happy that makes me. Maria's had such a tough time. Your girlfriend," I smiled. "You might want to tell Tom before he hears from someone else. Reporters probably won't go after him, but I wanted to let you and my parents know, and my ex-wife. You all might want to keep a low profile," I said. "Should I go tell Maria at work?" Mrs. Gray thought for a bit. She always took her time to think. She was very smart and never acted without thinking. Finally, she spoke. "That might be a good idea, especially if reporters start looking for your friends. Do you really think they'd be interested in her? How would they even know you two are dating?" "Anyone could have seen us. I don't think they'd go after her, but they might follow her to find me. I'm hiding out at the rectory. It shouldn't be a big deal. I'll just say no comment. I don't know if anyone will care. Maybe nothing will happen. But I don't want anyone close to me to feel hurt that I didn't tell them first." She said, "I'll call Tom right away. You go find Maria and tell her. If you can't find her, call her cell." I started to go out the door. "Oh, John," she said, following me. I looked back at her. She put her hand on my arm, stood on her tiptoes, and kissed my cheek. "I'm proud of you." "Wow," I said. "Almost as good as Maria's. See you, ma'am?" She smiled as I headed to my car. I found Maria at her work, having lunch in a small room they used for eating and storing coats. The desk clerk directed me there. She said, "Just knock and go in. We don't keep the door open because of the heat." I knocked and went in. There she was, sitting with Eva, eating yogurt. 2 other maids were at the table. Eva saw me first. "John, I didn't expect you to walk in." Maria turned, stood up, and kissed me on the cheek. "Well, I'm getting kisses from all the Gray women today," I said. She turned to the others. "Margie, Tony, this is John Buck. John, that's Marge, and that's Tony." "Nice to meet you. Maria, I need to talk to you in private, just for a minute." "Okay. Let's go outside and sit under the elm tree." It was hot outside, but the shade was nice. There was a picnic table. She looked worried. "Maria, the papers on the hospital shooting are coming out today. When I told you and your parents about the shooting, I told you the truth, but not everything. Now everyone will know. I shot the 2 terrorists. I killed them while they held 2 people hostage. I'm telling you because people might look for me, and they might find you or try to interview you. Reporters." Maria just looked at me. "How'd your hand get hurt? Dad didn't get how you got shot in the right hand when you're right-handed." "I used my left hand to shoot. I shot the guy, and the bullet went through him and hit my hand. I was holding his right hand up so he wouldn't fire his gun into a lady's head." I looked down, then into her gray eyes. She looked back for a few seconds. "You saved a lot of people," she said. I said nothing. We just sat there for about 3 minutes. "I should get back to work," she said, standing up. I walked with her back to the door. Suddenly she turned and hugged me, her cheek against my chest. "You should go," she said after a moment, her voice a little shaky. I touched her cheek with my bandaged hand and left. I visited the elementary school, which had just started the new fall term a week ago. I stopped at the front desk. "Mrs. Percival, I'm John Buck, Karen Ann's ex-husband," I said to the secretary. I knew her name because Karen Ann always said how important it was to keep the school secretary friendly. "Yes, Mr. Buck, how can I help you?" she said. I've tried to reach Karen Ann today on her cell phone. It's not an emergency, but it's something important that could affect her. But she isn't picking up. Is she in class now? It should only take a minute or two, no more than 5. She pulled out some papers with Karen Ann's schedule. She has about 5 more minutes of lunch. I think she's in the lounge. Go down the hall and to the right. There's a sign. Thank you. Karen Ann was there, sitting with 3 others, laughing. My heart ached a bit at seeing her. Always smart, always attractive. John? She said, surprised to see me. Excuse me, guys, my ex-husband. John, what is it? She seemed nice, not upset. One of the other teachers, an older man, looked annoyed that I interrupted. He noticed my bandaged hand and smirked. Terry Marks was there, too. She nodded, stood, and left without a smile. I need a minute. Can we talk here? I asked. She nodded. Those dark eyes. That presence. No wonder Dunstan went after her. Some police papers will be opened. My name will be out there. Reporters might want to talk to you. Me? Why me? Because I'm the guy who killed the terrorists. She looked surprised, then she smiled mockingly. She was fitting me into her idea of who I was. Some thoughts are hidden, some are on display. She shook her head. Sure you did. I tilted my head. I thought you should know because once the papers are open, everyone will know. I was a big disappointment to you, but I was never a liar. Sorry to bother you. Take care of the kids. I turned towards the door. As I left, I heard her laugh and say, he has dreams of... I thought that maybe if I'd become famous before we split up, she might have loved me. I went back to work. As the day was ending, Father Michalis called my office. John, could you stop by my office before you go? Yes, sir, I said. I gathered some notes he'd asked for and headed up. I knocked, and his secretary Kathy said, Go right in, Mr. Buck. I entered and saw that Father was on the phone. He waved me to sit and finished his call. Okay, you have the notes, he asked. I handed them over and he set them aside. Good. You're approved for the program in Cleveland starting soon. You are enrolled unless Kathy is lying to me. I heard Kathy from behind the door. I did not lie. Papers will be here soon by fax to prove it. Father laughed. He and Kathy had known each other for years. He had baptized her kids and often went to her family events. She could listen to his conversations when needed, and he trusted her completely. She was also the best-paid secretary in the hospital. Now, your name is being mentioned in the news for the shooting. They have pictures of you from the Marines and one from a hallway here, probably from our yearbook. Good picture, by the way. You're on national and local news, right, Kath? She stood in the doorway. Yes, he is. I'm getting requests for interviews on national news. Fox earlier, MSNBC just now. One talk show is offering $10,000 for the first interview. I shook my head and smiled. I'm sorry, Father. I don't want to do any interviews. That was the worst day of my life. I lost my marriage and my kids. People died everywhere. I can't forget that guy's head. I stopped and shook my head. John, counseling is available. I think you should go, he said. I didn't want to go. Later, I wished I had. Counseling would have helped, but back then it felt like a burden. Maybe it was part of PTSD, trying to handle it on my own and letting the pain build up. He continued, Your program starts in a few weeks. After that, if you get the job, which I think you will, we have plans. A paid sabbatical to get a master's degree in Minneapolis, or maybe a program at Ohio State. I know someone at UC who might help as well. So the Cleveland program was first, then the job, then hiring helpers, then more school. Had he planned my whole future? He went on, Get things ready as best you can, if the papers get here. They'll be here soon, Kathy said. Look them over and check online. We need you prepared. I'm sorry the board hasn't approved you yet, but I won't interview anyone else until they decide on you. They'll probably decide by December. Sorry, they delay when they don't like my attitude, he said, laughing. I hadn't thought someone would risk his job for me, Kathy said with mock surprise. Oh, a fax just came in. It's the Cleveland program information for John Buck. Father said, Take those, go home, and say hi to Phil. Tell him I'll be there Sunday night. Reporters were outside as I left for the day. I went out the back and made it to the parking lot. They didn't know my car yet, so I got away. I went to Maria's for dinner on Saturday. Reporters hadn't bothered them yet. I hoped they wouldn't. I wasn't sure how Maria would handle the stress. Tom and I talked about the shooting, and I explained what happened. I was sure Tom guessed it was me from the video, but he didn't say anything. That was part of his character, calm and respectful. Now he could ask questions. When Sally joined us, I also explained about Karen Ann, Dunstan, the kids, and how Father Mahalas was helping me get a new job. Maria sat next to me on the couch, and after a while Tom and Sally said goodnight, leaving us alone. Maria seemed braver when her parents left. She hugged me, and we kissed. It was the first time I felt such a strong urge from her. I wondered if she was a virgin. I only knew a bit of her past, the attack when she was 20. I didn't know all the details. Should a serious boyfriend need to know everything about his new lover's past? Should it matter? I'd only known her for a month. We weren't going to be intimate yet anyway. I was taking it slow, and we couldn't be together at my place. Smart move, John, living in a rectory, I thought with a smile. That could create more problems for her. Being intimate in her parish priest's house? I almost laughed as I kissed her, thinking about it. We shared a few more strong kisses. I felt her warm body close to mine. My hands slid down her arms, but I stopped myself with some effort and pulled back a bit. She must have noticed because she kissed me a bit harder. Why was she so eager? Maybe she had waited a long time for a boyfriend, and now that she had one, she felt free to express herself. I whispered, "Not yet. I want this, but not yet. We need to take things slow." "It's you," she said. "I see so much good in you. I've waited for someone like you. I've never been this forward before. It's been a long time since I had a boyfriend." "Good. I don't want any competition," I replied. We stayed quiet for a moment. I sighed, stood up, and said goodbye. We kissed at the door. I avoided the news all weekend. I thought it might mention me. On Sunday, I sat in the big, dark living room with comfy chairs and a couch. The fireplace was cold, and I sipped iced tea from the fridge. Father Philip came home around 7, made some pasta salad, and we called it dinner. An hour later, we went out and sat down. Father Mike joined us. Phil brought some fizzy water, which he poured into a wine glass. We sat quietly. Then Phil said, "Father Mike told me you did something brave and noble and that you had a tough divorce. I understand what happened at the hospital now and why the divorce followed. I wonder at your strength, John. Father said you have hidden strength. I think it's your character." I said nothing. We looked out as it got darker in Ohio. Both priests just rocked in their chairs. It felt safe. Father Mike finally spoke. "Security can keep reporters out, but they can't stop them from seeing you arrive. They can help you through if there are too many." I laughed. "It sounds like a problem from a Jerry Lewis movie, doesn't it? Do you think they're bothering Karen Ann?" Phil said, "Oh, they are. One reporter called her the recently divorced wife. Another said she didn't know where you were. She was with her kids and got angry when she said no comment. She hasn't given any interviews that I know of." Father Mike said, "You have many interview requests. Late-night talk shows, Fox News, local TV stations in Cincinnati, Dayton, Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, and newspapers." "Finally, I get the attention I deserve," I said jokingly. "Now that I live with a priest, I become famous." Father Mike found that funny. I said, "You know, people haven't been great lately. Mass murder, divorce, cheating, arrogance. Then I met this beautiful woman, moved into the nicest place I've ever lived, found a career, and made 2 good friends." "Toast," Father Mike said. We lifted our tea or water, to not getting what we deserve in life. Cheers. After all, these guys believed in original sin. Life for some of them was a constant fight to be good. We sat in silence, thinking about how people can be bad. It was a nice evening. Father Mike eventually wandered off and Phil went to bed. I stayed on the porch, watching the night and thinking. The 2 priests saw my character differently from most people. To Father Mike, I was humble. To Phil, I was strong. But to Karen Ann, I was clumsy. I believed most people would agree with her. Humility was a way to hide my insecurity. Like my girlfriend avoided things, I settled for good enough. Not all of my decisions were bad, but my career choices were driven by fear. I was afraid to fail, so I didn't try. Now Father Mike wanted me to join a program he was setting up, forcing me to think about my future, an adult's future. As the hospital grew, it needed professionals. Was I a real hospital administrator or just a guy doing a job? I decided to let the police and Homeland Security reports tell my story. It wasn't just humility. The worst day of my life, the day that ended my marriage and took my kids, was not a day to brag about or make money from. I never wanted to remember that day. The hospital didn't need a famous anti-terrorist. I believed more publicity led to more terrorism. Stories were written and shown on TV, and I was the focus. The papers called me a recluse because they couldn't find me. One TV reporter called me a virtual hermit. I was a celebrity, and maybe my elusiveness made them more curious. Phil would find news articles and magazines that mentioned me, show them to me, and we'd talk about them on the porch. My parents spoke to a few reporters. They said I had a normal childhood and were shocked when I joined the Marines. Mom said I was gentle, and Dad agreed. I was a hero to some, not to all. Most guesses about me were positive, but not all. People asked where I got the gun. Had I carried it into the hospital against the rules? One right-wing outlet wanted to know what I was hiding. An Al Jazeera essay hinted that I didn't give the attackers a chance to surrender and that the shooting might not have been as reported. One story even claimed I was a weapons expert in the Marines, since I'd run a rifle range for my last 7 months. I smiled at that. You don't need to be an expert to fire a pistol from just inches away, even if you're using the wrong hand. Most mistakes could have been avoided with a bit more effort or careful reading of the police reports. Where did the pistol come from? What was the time frame? I wondered about the ethics of the journalism profession. I started going to work early for the next few weeks. I parked in a lot behind the hospital that actually belonged to a warehouse. I made sure to get there before sunrise and entered through a service entrance that was busy with food and medical supply trucks at that time. I waved to hospital workers I knew. Nobody else noticed me. During the day, I saw reporters at the front and heard that 2 were watching the lot where I used to park. When I got back from the Cleveland program, they were gone. People noticed me throughout the day. For a while, I was informally celebrated. Strangers recognized me from the news, and hospital workers mentioned me to friends. Lots of people stopped to thank me. Some kids wanted my autograph. Writing was hard because of my hand, but I signed 2 papers and 1 cast and decided that was enough. I started practicing typing. It was hard and slow, but possible. My hand got tired quickly. Cleveland would be tough. On my first day back, one of the cafeteria ladies saw me, walked around the glass cases, hugged me quietly, and went back. Visitors were smiling, probably confused about why a small woman with a hairnet was hugging me for buying coffee. I told the woman behind me, "It's a hospital thing, we all hug." She smiled and shook her head, but then I heard Buck in quiet tones, and all the workers started clapping. The visitors heard John Buck, and they clapped too. I joked, "What does a guy have to do to pay for his coffee around here?" And people laughed. I made my way out, getting pats on the back and arms, and had to drink the coffee black. Some people held up their cell phones. At lunch, I went to the cafeteria again and tried to blend in the line, talking to a guy visiting his newborn and wife in the maternity ward. Both mother and baby were doing well. His wife was nursing their daughter, so he decided to get some food. He found that amusing. New dads often see things more brightly. I remembered being a new dad and tried to block out any bitter thoughts. I congratulated him and shook his hand. "I'm John," I said. "Barry," he replied. He looked at my name tag. "Yeah, I get that a lot," I said, smiling, hoping he'd not make a big deal out of it. He smiled and nodded, respecting my privacy. This time, one of the doctors pointed me out. Again, I heard my name, and people started looking around, so I looked around too. The cashier refused my card. "Sorry, Mr. Buck, this one's on us. You saved many of us here, and your money's no good." "Thanks, Megan." I thought, I should have taken a dessert, too. I took my tray to a quiet table around a corner facing away from others. I ate in peace for about 10 minutes. I returned my tray and plates and was pushing through the crowd when someone with a camera used a flash, drawing attention to me. I waved and kept walking, hearing my name again. When would this end? I didn't want to be a spectacle. I had many messages sent by the hospital secretaries. TV shows wanted me for interviews. The Tonight Show was my favorite of the requests. I thought about it but decided not to do any of them. They could read the police reports. I stuck to my policy not because I couldn't handle the attention, but because the incident was terrible. Talking about it might encourage copycats. I had the hospital, meaning Kathy, send a statement to all interview requests. It said, "No comment. I have nothing to say. I do not want to encourage further terrorism by talking about this horrible tragedy." I had known Maria for almost 2 months. It wasn't long, but long enough for serious thoughts. The last week of September came, and I needed to go to Cleveland. The day before I left, in the late afternoon, we visited a park with a quiet path and a waterfall. We sat on a large rock and talked, watching the waterfall 20 feet away. I held her hand. I said, "Maria, I'm ready to fall in love with you. I've known you almost 2 months now. I've told you everything about myself. I also think you've told me the most important things about you. There's nothing about you I don't like. You're beautiful, gentle, and smart. I want you, and it's hard to keep my hands off you, but I'm not ready for a commitment. I'm not asking you to go steady. That's too childish. I'm asking if you feel the same. I'm not promising anything. I want no promises from you either. Not yet, but I need to know if I'm alone in this." She picked up my other hand, holding both of mine. She took a deep breath. "About 10 years ago, I was in college in Louisville. I had a new boyfriend named Brandon. I'd known him for 2 weeks, and we went on 2 dates. He seemed like a nice guy. He took me to a party. I trusted him, but it wasn't a frat house, just a house some guys rented. Brandon was drinking with these other guys, and then they took some pills. They said it was meth. I tried to leave, but they wouldn't let me. They turned on loud music. They started making sexual comments, touching themselves and then me. My boyfriend held my arms while the others tore my shirt. They thought it was funny. I was crying and begging them to stop, but they mocked me. It was horrible. Just then, someone knocked at the door. It was a neighbor. The stereo was really loud. Brandon let go of my arms for a second, so I kicked one guy and ran. I got out through the back door, but one of them grabbed my arm and I yanked it away, hurting my shoulder. I was outside, screaming. My arm was hanging awkwardly. The neighbor must have heard the noise because she came over and saw what was happening. She started yelling at them to let me go. Then a police car showed up and they ran away. In shock, I ended up hiding under a bush, screaming and confused. The neighbor saw me and took me to the police. Brandon said nothing happened, but my shoulder was hurt badly. I had cuts, scratches, and bruises. My clothes were ripped. The neighbor lady told the police what she saw. Because of this, my boyfriend and one of the guys went to jail for a few months. The third guy testified against them. I couldn't. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. I wasn't in my right mind. I was sent to a mental hospital. She took a breath. My shoulder eventually got better, but it took a toll on me. I stopped going out. I didn't shop. I even stopped going to church. I took several baths a day. Since then, I haven't had another boyfriend. I didn't want any men around me anymore. I was shocked. She was so beautiful that I couldn't imagine why anyone would hurt her. "I'm so sorry, Maria. I can't believe this happened to you." She kissed my hand. "It was a long time ago. My therapist, Carrie, says I have to choose to rejoin the world. I want to, John. I'm ready to fall in love. I've never been with a man, never been in a real relationship. My parents know how hard it is for me to go out or even be around people. I once heard them say they didn't think I could ever have a normal relationship." Mom was crying. I asked, "Do you think you could now?" She squeezed my hands. "Only since I met you." I leaned in and we kissed softly. We lost our balance and fell. There was a pool below, about 4 feet deep, and we fell in with a splash. We got out laughing, a bit bruised, but okay. Our clothes were almost dry by the time we reached the car. The money in my wallet stayed wet for a week, so I thought about that kiss whenever I bought something. Maria later told her mother it was the most memorable kiss of her life. It was for me, too. I called Karen Ann to let her know I'd be out of town. She needed to get the house ready for sale soon since I was entitled to half of it. Her answering machine picked up, so I left a message. The aim of the Cleveland program was to train counselors and administrators to help doctors maintain or improve their professional status and prevent them from losing their licenses. Hospitals wanted to keep good doctors even when they needed to take breaks or further their education. They didn't want them to leave forever. I felt out of place at the Cleveland program. Most of the students were from fields like hospital management, business, and administration. I was a liberal arts major. I had to study late into the night to keep up and sometimes called Father McCall's for advice. Eventually, everyone figured out who I was, but they respected my request to keep it quiet. I formally announced it in one class to stop the whispers, and we all went out for a drink together. I explained my injury and bought a round of beers. I hoped my short-lived fame would end by October. About a week later, a professor surprised me in class by saying they had a gift for me, a speech-to-text program for my computer. It made my life much easier. The class clapped, and I thanked them. Most weekends, I drove home. One weekend in mid-November, I didn't. We had presentations to prepare. We had to simulate counseling sessions with doctors of different ages and backgrounds. We needed to figure out when their licenses would expire and the best ways to renew them, considering various factors like age, retirement plans, and income. It wasn't exciting, but it was practical. We had to understand the entire situation of the doctor, including family factors and other complications. I was assigned a thoracic surgeon who was 34, had a wife who stayed at home, and was expecting a child soon. I wrote many pages, making sure I covered everything. Talking clearly helped, and it went well. I called Maria, and we talked about how much we missed each other. She ended the call with, "I love you." I whistled, surprised but happy. "I love you too, Maria." Click. I felt like a kid using a forbidden word. The course would end in the third week of December, just before Christmas. The class was helpful, but it could be a lot. In the end, each professional was responsible for keeping their own licenses updated. They needed to know the rules in their field and stay updated on changes. Counselors could only guide and help, point out opportunities, and do some research. The world of medical licenses was complex, but I was starting to understand it. On the phone one night, Father Michaelis said, "That's why it was originally the job of each field to manage this." I would return to our merciful Lord after Christmas, and Father Michaelis and I would start making plans to set up the new department. The program gave me resources to find information about certifications and courses across the country and the world. It was up to me to make it work out well for everyone. We didn't want to lose good doctors just because they wanted to spend 6 months with Doctors Without Borders or learn a new medical technique. We wanted these great doctors to come back to our merciful Lord. I called Maria at least several times each week. We talked about family. She hadn't met my parents yet. Sports and general life stuff. The calls were pleasant and usually ended with simple statements of love that felt natural now. It made me happy until I started feeling a strong physical attraction. I thought of her small frame and wondered if she felt the same way. I returned home on a Saturday morning with a certificate, some graduate credits, thick binders, computer disks and drives, and a huge list of websites I needed to keep updated. There were promises of recommendations from 2 of my teachers. It was tough to change the old system in a new way. I'd need to visit hospitals to see how they operated. It helped that national and international medical groups were centralizing things. I drove straight to Maria's house. It had been almost a month since I last saw her. The weather was cold and gray, but there was no snow or rain. When I pulled up to the curb, Maria opened the door and ran to me. Her mom watched, looking surprised but happy. Maria hugged me and kissed me right there in front of her mom. She was beautiful. It was a long kiss. We walked to the front door arm in arm, Mrs. Gray holding it open. "Welcome home, John." She kissed me on the cheek. "It's good to be home." "I like being home," I said. We talked about the program, how it would change my job and other things. Mrs. Gray sent us to the store to get some vegetables and groceries. We went across town to the farmer's market, a big warehouse where farmers sold their produce directly. It wasn't the best season for it, but there was a Kroger next door. Maria walked with me, holding my hand and arm. It was nice pushing a cart and picking out food together. In the canned goods aisle, we bumped into Karen Ann. Maria felt me tense up and stop. She looked up. Karen Ann was pushing a cart with Hanley in a car seat. Maria asked, "What's up?" "Karen Ann and Hanley." We walked up. Hanley looked great, already 9 months old. Karen Ann looked tired and stressed, but still attractive. Any man would still notice her. "Hello, Karen Ann," I said when she saw us. She just stared at me, then at Maria. "Oh, hi, John," she replied, looking at Maria. There was an awkward pause. "Karen, this is Maria Gray. Maria, this is Karen Ann Prynne and her daughter Hanley." Hanley was too young to know what was going on. Maria spoke up, holding my arm tightly. "Hello, Karen Ann and Hanley." She shook Karen Ann's hand. John has told me a lot about you, Karen Ann. It's good to finally meet you. Karen Ann hesitated and said, John, we really need to talk. The house is for sale, but no offers yet. Really, if I could call you? I wanted to say, I've left you plenty of messages and you've yet to return one, but I didn't. I nodded. Of course. In a few days for sure, I said. I've tried to call, but the house number is out of service and your cell sends me to voicemail. Karen Ann waved that off. She'd make the first move. She had control. We just stood there, awkwardly looking at each other. I didn't try to fill the silence. Karen Ann surprised me, showing some jealousy. So where are you two living now? Are you together? This wasn't a side of her I expected to see. Maria, normally shy, took charge. We live on the other side of town, she said, hinting we might be living together. I almost laughed. Father Philip would love the implications. Well, I hope you are very happy. I have to keep Hanley moving or she'll get fussy. I'll call you, John. Sure, soon. Good seeing you, Karen Ann, and Hanley, too. We parted, trying to avoid each other for the rest of our time in the store. It had been an awkward encounter. Poor Karen Ann, Maria said quietly. She doesn't know whether to admit she made a mistake or be mad at you. It was sad. She burned a bridge before she realized she needed to get back across. I decided that ultimately benefited me. Karen Ann is very pretty, Maria said. Is that the kind of woman you find attractive? She was struggling to say big-breasted to me. Karen Ann had large breasts, which were even more noticeable because she had just finished breastfeeding. She was the type of woman men noticed right away. Yes, I replied. I like beautiful women of all sizes and shapes, but I didn't love her just because she was beautiful. I thought she had strong character, too. Turns out I was wrong. But in the end, I think I got a better deal. Maria was trying to be careful. I have a lot of baggage. It's not a competition. You are honest, good, and beautiful. I don't want to be with her. I want to be with you. I enjoy learning about us. We headed to her house with the groceries. Her mom made a great meal for my first day home, while I talked about the program and Mr. Gray nodded and asked questions. I quickly gathered up the dishes. We cleaned up and loaded the dishwasher. It was around 7 in the evening. I looked at Maria. I'm going to see my parents. Do you want to meet them? I knocked and opened the door for Maria. My parents came to the door when I called. I hadn't seen them for a month. I turned to Maria. She looked small and modest, with her bright red hair tied back in a ponytail, showing off her clear, pale skin. My mom was a bit shocked when she saw her. My dad stayed still. If a small woman can be stunning, it was Maria that night, with her face framed by faux fur and quilted linings of her winter coat. Mom, Dad, this is Maria Gray. We've been seeing each other for several months now. I thought it was time for you to meet her. There was a pause while Mom found the right words. Maria was striking. Quiet and stunning didn't usually go together in Dad's world. Beautiful women were usually more obvious. But Maria was quiet, smart, and gentle. Not pushy at all. Dad was smart. He could see some hurt and pain in her. She was more than just a pretty face, which made her even more interesting. Maria spoke quietly, making Mom and Dad lean in to hear her. I had seen this side of her before, quiet and shy, but with my parents. She kept her head up and looked right at them. She really didn't want to make a mistake. They were trying to read her lips because she spoke so softly at first. Welcome, welcome, dear, my mother said, shaking Maria's hand and leading her to the living room, taking her coat. Dad stepped back and looked at me with a look that fathers give sons who bring home someone special. I hoped everyone would like each other, and it seemed to be going well. Maria was humble. She was happy to sit on an old couch and talk about us. My parents were impressed by her looks, but they saw she was more than that. Character mattered. The hardest part was when my parents asked about her life and work. They didn't know her story, but she handled it truthfully without too many details. She talked about her recent work, her family's support, and a tough event that had happened. My parents didn't ask for more. She smiled at me and held my arm or hand. My mom brought out ice cream and we each had a bowl, and it was a great first meeting. Dad laughed when Maria talked about her dad and her childhood in Sky Gray. Maria had a soft laugh, and she used it a lot as Mom and Dad told stories about my younger years. Maria mentioned she was related to the founders of the town, Gray and his Miami wife, She Who Shines. Actually, she was descended from their adopted white child, one of peace. She wasn't sure about all the stories of her ancestors, but her father had old records and diaries. That caught my and Dad's attention, as we both liked local history. We left with a promise to come back soon. My mother hugged Maria, and my parents stood at the door as we walked away in the dark. I held Maria's hand to the car and opened the door for her. I got in my side and started the engine. Your parents are wonderful. You really know how to make a good impression, I said. Sometimes I wonder if you are too good to be true. I'm just me, in love with you. It's amazing. At her house, we walked onto the porch, and I kissed her in our heavy coats in the cold. A goodnight kiss might be the best part of not being married yet. Without a sound, I heard music. Chapter 8. All is said. Father McCall's laid out his plans for my new job when I returned to work the first week of January. The board has approved the new office. You will be in the lead position. You will have a secretary to handle documents, making sure all transcripts are up to date and other achievements are fully recorded. He explained in detail how he wanted the work done, asking my opinion and considering how many others we would need to hire. He had a whole book of plans with suggestions for my input on points he thought were up for debate. It was the booklet he had presented to the board. I copied a lot of your reports and ideas from last summer, he admitted. I also used the contractual system from Good Sam in Minneapolis, where I used to work. He wanted to know how the program in Cleveland worked, so I explained about new databases, professional groups, and contracts. He asked me to visit all the big hospitals in the area to see how they managed things. The board had set up a committee to guide us. They were writing a step-by-step plan using Father McCall's booklet and their own know-how. Some were on boards at other hospitals, and one Dr. Johansson ran a similar program for doctor assignments. They wanted to meet me. I was shocked. An office, an assistant, maybe another soon, being in charge of others. You can choose your own secretary or assistant, either from current staff with their agreement or a new hire. It's up to you. I'd like to review the job description before you post it. Your new office is being renovated right above the main entrance. Your title will be Deputy Chief Executive for Professional Credentials. You will report to me. You're not above the department heads, but you'll work with them. They approved this position, and you for it. They know too many slips are happening as the hospital grows, not due to lack of licenses, but because people see us as a stepping stone. They've promised to help you, and won't get mad at any questions, even silly ones. This includes things like the color of the paint on the walls. He smiled. He meant the department heads wouldn't hold it against me if I asked a silly question. It was a lot to take in. I hadn't been responsible for others since I was in the Marine Corps. I wondered if this was happening because of the shooting. Father, am I being promoted because of the murders? He sat back, thoughtful. It was serious to him about our sense of value. He put his hands together, looking at them as he started, then at me. I first suggested a change in this area last April, 2 months before that day. I even mentioned you for the position, but there are weaknesses in your resume, mostly due to your age. You are 29, almost 30. You'll deal with doctors in their 70s. Some are conceited, insecure, critical. Your work was good, but you only have a bachelor's degree, and to some, that makes you insignificant. In discussions, we thought you'd fit well, but weren't ready to run the office. Then the shooting. Then everyone found out who stopped the killers, and especially you weren't on TV or in newspapers. To the department heads, you rose in their eyes. I said I was sending you to the Cleveland program while keeping your salary here. They agreed. They see you as friendly without a bad word about anyone. They know you've had offers to tell your story, some for money. They reconsidered you. It wasn't the killing that got you this position, but how you handled it. They came to trust you. At the last meeting, they were unanimous about creating the position, putting you in it, and starting it soon. I ordered your office to be front and center near the hub, making it hard for doctors to avoid you. I am very happy, Father. I will need advice. I'm here. Phil can help too. The committee can help, Dr. Johansson can help, every department head. They all know you. They can be ambitious and manipulative, so your humility may help. They don't usually think deeply about the character of an administrator. He smiled. I'm nervous now. Thank you, sir. I will. He interrupted. Don't you want to know the salary? He paused. I can say they won't understand you for sure. He told me the amount, and I realized I was going to have a future in sky gray. I went to my new office, which was a mess with all the construction work. The builders looked at me as if I was intruding, so I left and went to another part of the building. Late that afternoon, I got a phone call and accepted an interview. Hello? I'm trying to reach John Buck, someone said. The voice was male, young, and familiar. That's me. I don't like talking on the phone. I only see it useful for making appointments. This is Tony Spagnol, Mr. Buck. I was the kid. Tony! What a surprise! How did you get my number? I called the hospital and they put me through to Father Mike. He said you wouldn't mind. Anyway, Mr. Buck, I have a favor to ask. I have a friend working for the school newspaper. She thinks it would be a big deal to get an interview with you since you haven't given any. She interviewed me and my mom, but we've done like a dozen interviews. I was even on CNN once. He sounded proud. I could understand since he almost got killed. He continued. So, she asked me to ask you if you'd do an interview with her. Would it hurt if a school reporter got the first interview? By now, I had no more requests coming in. There had been so many bombings and threats that Merciful Lord Hospital was just background noise for people who didn't lose anyone or know anyone who got hurt. Give her my number and tell her to call me, I said without much interest. When should she call? He asked. Any time. Tell her now, okay? I laughed. Good hearing from you, Tony. Say hi to Marilyn and Cal for me. Sure thing, Mr. Buck. Bye. I heard him whispering as he hung up. He should have just handed her the phone. And he did. Her call came right away from the same number. I liked this. Hello? Mr. Buck? This is Susan Daggers. I'm a reporter for the Clark High School Gazette. Tony told you I'd like to interview you about the Merciful Lord Hospital shooting. Would you agree to that, sir? Are you a good reporter, Miss Daggers? I asked. I'm learning. I think I've written some good stories about crime near the high school and some kids who got into trouble. Although my advisor wouldn't print the one about the gang beatings, I try to say what's true as best I can. Is this a what happened story or an opinion piece? It's about what happened. I read some police interviews about you, but they were confusing. You read them, huh? So, the kid actually did some work before the interview. They interviewed me many times, so their reports were all over the place, I said. You may interview me. Can you come to the hospital? I can show you where I was and where things happened. I heard cheers on the other end. She thought this was her big break, I guess. I smiled. To be young again. Can I come Saturday? That way I won't miss school. Morning would be best. I have a basketball game in the late afternoon. How about 9 in the morning? You can bring a camera, but no pictures of me. You can record audio, though. Great! This is great! Thank you so much, Mr. Buck. 9 on Saturday, I'll be there. We hung up. I'd forgotten how excited young people could be. On Saturday, she was right on time. I saw her enter and go straight to the information desk and ask for me. Jody was back after so many months and saw me coming. You must be the reporter, Susan Daggers, I said. She was a tall black girl with her hair in cornrows. She wore a dark pantsuit, low-heeled shoes, and carried a notebook and a small recording device. Jody could hear every word. Susan turned and smiled at me. You look just like your picture, she said. I've avoided cameras, but some have caught me, so I don't know which one you mean. Would you like to talk in my office? Better yet, I'll take you around the hospital, show you where things happened. You can take pictures, just not of me. There might be some crazy person out there looking for revenge. I want as few pictures of me out there as possible. Okay? She said, I'm a little sad I can't take your picture, but I understand. So where did things happen? Sort of right here. I looked at Jody. Have you given any interviews? She said, I was mentioned in some stories, but just a line here and there. I thought you didn't give interviews. Only when I'm sure it's important. Jody smiled, nodding. Susan. Were you involved in the shooting, ma'am? Jody. Lost part of my spleen when I got shot in the stomach. Susan looked surprised. A lot of people here were involved, and some are still grieving. We need to be discreet, I said. She nodded. The shooters came in there and started shooting everyone. Jody was one of the first. I showed her where the shootings were and where I was. I walked her through my actions, pushing doctors into the classroom, finding Tommy's gun and ammo, following the bodies to the cafeteria. She took pictures of all the spots, especially the waiting room where many were hurt and killed. I detailed what I saw and did in the cafeteria. Tony was right here, I pointed, and one of the killers had his left arm around his neck with his rifle pointed at the security guards across the room. Mrs. Spagnol was here, I pointed again, and her guy had his left arm around her neck and his pistol in his right hand pointed at her head. His rifle was on the floor. It may have jammed or he needed to reload and didn't have time when the security guards arrived. I signaled to the guards from here. I stepped forward and shot Mrs. Spagnol's guy as I knocked his pistol away. The bullet went through his head and hit my hand, I said, holding up my hand, and then I stepped over to Tony's guy and shot him. He was looking right at me by then, and I shot him under his eye. They both fell. Tony and his mom were okay, and it was over. I showed her my right palm with its big scar. Wild, she said. I read you used to be a Marine. Did that help you at the time? The Marines taught me to look at the situation and then act. Once I saw I could help and had a good chance to save some people and stay alive, I moved. I think I was only behind the killers maybe 10 seconds before I shot them. It was fast. Luckily, they were in a tough spot with the hostages and security guards. What happened to the guy you took the pistol from? He was already gone. I came across Jody. She was shot and down right where you saw her, upset thinking she was going to die. I remember I said, "I hope not," or something like that. She told me she thought there were only 2 guys. You were married when this happened? Yes. We divorced shortly after. Was she relieved to find out you were okay? I think she was. She thought I was a bad shot since I hit myself in the hand. I like that way of looking at it, too. Did the incident have anything to do with your divorce? She asked. Was she really just 15? You do have a future in journalism, Sue, I said, and took a deep breath. Yes, it showed both of us that we shouldn't stay married. It was heartbreaking. The worst moment of my life, both at the hospital and at home. Why don't you give interviews until now? She asked. Because it makes things worse. One bad act can inspire another. A killing, a big attack. It was the worst time of my life. It ended so many lives. I don't want to remember it. I tell you about it because I want it to be over. Susan was a delight. We had some ice cream from the machine in the cafeteria and sat there talking about that day, who lived and died, what it was all about. Then she asked if it had changed how I see life. It's like anything else. People think I handled a bad situation well. Good, because a million things could have gone differently and worse. I had nightmares some nights, but it was not as bad as it could have been. I was very sure I was doing something to help, and with that thought, I have peace of mind. 2 hours passed. Her mother was coming to pick her up. Do you have a basketball game? Yeah, we're playing Merciful Savior here in Sky Gray. At 4. Maybe I'll make it. My girlfriend went to Savior. I'd like to read your story, get a copy of the paper. If I may? I'll send you one or just drop it off. I go right by here a lot. Mom works down the street. She's a lawyer. It should be in on Friday. Oh, here's my mom now, she said and stood up. I stood too. Her mother was also tall, very elegant, graceful. A pretty woman dressed quite professionally, probably a role model for her daughter. Miss Daggers, we were just finishing up. I'm John Buck, I said as we shook hands. She had a very big smile. My daughter thinks it's a big deal to get an interview with you, Mr. Buck. She was very convincing. She knew I'd do anything for Tony, so she got him to call. She laughed lightly. Tony has a crush on her. I smiled and looked at Susan. So we know he has good judgment. They smiled, and soon we said goodbye. I warned Father Mike about the interview. He thought it was the best way to end any lingering attention to my part in the incident. He laughed. High school paper? Tony's? Good choice. I called Maria and asked if she'd like to go to the basketball game at her old school. She said, of course, no, well, maybe, or rather not, okay. So a little before 4, we found ourselves climbing into the stands to watch Merciful Savior play George Rogers Clark. The bleachers were full of fans from the 2 schools this Saturday. We stayed on the Merciful Savior side of the stands, but Miss Daggers saw us and waved to me. Maria saw several people she knew and said hi. We found seats, and I pointed out Susan to Maria. She's tall. Yes. You played basketball? I did until I found out it's a tall girl's game. The women in my family are always short, so we were encouraged to play short games like softball or soccer or lacrosse. Field hockey also, not volleyball much or basketball. I was a third baseman in baseball. Not that talented, but I could hit, and I had a decent arm for the throw to first. I sat on the bench in basketball in high school. Maria smiled in that way of all women who know a man wants to impress them with every act, throwing a ball, opening a jar, fixing a car, anything. Really? I said. Maria had a smile. It was fun. Susan turned out to be a marvelous forward. Xavier lost the game on a free throw by a Clark guard. Maria was rooting for her old school, so I tried not to feel too much joy for Susan's win. When you only know one kid in a game, it draws your attention. Game over, Maria and I talked to a few of her acquaintances, and I introduced Susan's mother to her while the teams changed clothes or gathered their things. I think Maria liked being at her old school. She'd been nervous, but seeing old friends made her happy. She was laughing and joking and yelling at good and bad plays for most of the game. Quiet, serious Maria became very upset over a block charge call. I looked at her, her face red like her hair, standing and demanding justice. I felt sorry for the referee. Maria hit me on the shoulder when she saw me smiling as she sat down. I saw the Maria she was still inside, that woman who came down the steps at her house and told me not to leave. Wow, again. Susan's story came out Friday. I found a copy of the paper in my box at work late that afternoon. Its headline was, "The Savior of Our Merciful Lord Hospital." It was mentioned on Fox and CNN, MSNBC, and others. Savior with the U in the sky gray tradition became my nickname, and so I smiled and shook my head. Named by a kid in her school paper. She was interviewed on several channels, Fox and MSNBC, and said, "He doesn't want it to inspire a bigger tragedy. He says it was the worst day of his life." Susan was famous in her own way. Good for her. Of all the stories written about me, all the reports that showed my picture on all the TV shows, it was an interview by Susan Daggers that made a certain hidden member of the IWC take action. He saw her on CNN and recorded it, Homeland Security later discovered. He was in no hurry, but he knew what he wanted to do, and he wanted to do it to the man they called Savior. He had a job. No one knew he was illegal, and he had just contacted an old friend through the internet, secretly, of course. The friend was not IWC, but word got around. Yasin was still loose in America. Phil came to like the nickname that stuck to me. Once a high school girl gave it to me. He was living with the Savior of Our Merciful Lord. Karen Ann called in March. She was businesslike and distant in tone and words. We talked about the house price and related stuff. The house was small, cold, and built cheaply. I thought the price was too high, but she wanted to keep it that way for a while. I mentioned the kids, but she didn't want them around someone living in a way she found wrong. "I don't want my kids around people living together without being married," she said. This was coming from a woman who had 2 kids with one man while married and living with another. I wanted to laugh, but held it in. "Karen Ann, Maria and I are not living together. We never have. We are serious about each other, but no, we don't live together," I said. "You assumed, and we let you. I'm sorry." Karen Ann was quiet. I wondered why she wasn't mad or arguing. She finally said, "John, I wish things were better between us. Good night." She hung up. Chapter 9. The Power of Love. I sometimes met Maria at church, either on Fridays or Sundays. We sat together, she took communion, and afterward we ate breakfast at a local diner or I walked her to work. We held hands. Maria greeted people she saw but didn't really know. We talked about her therapy, ball games, politics, religion, books, and everything else. She said she was a natural redhead. I joked that she'd have to prove it someday. She thought for a moment, then said with a playful tone, "Someday I will." My heart skipped a beat. It was a relaxed, steady romance. We weren't teenagers, and as time went on, I noticed the difference. We watched TV with her parents, walked by the tennis courts watching kids play, or read books in the same room. She visited my parents' house and talked with my mom, sometimes even inviting me over for dinner. Mom and she went to garage sales twice, and Dad mentioned they watched a Reds game together. I had never thought about my girlfriend becoming friends with my parents. I spoke to them about Maria, her problems, and the tragedy that made her so withdrawn. They noticed she was quiet but saw she was more open with me. They saw her trying to connect with them, which was encouraging. They talked about her lacking a college degree and having a simple job, things future in-laws worry about. They now understood that the tragedy had long-lasting effects. "She's so gentle," Mom said. I didn't assume too much. We saw each other a few times a week. I was in love, but it had only been a year since Hanley was born, and less for the divorce. We were alone and kissed often, but kept things respectful and avoided sex. There was still a lot I didn't know about her. Sometimes she seemed interested in being close, and other times she avoided it. We talked about it, and it seemed like she needed to give herself permission. Maria invited me for dinner one Sunday in early April. She and her mom were cooking, and her dad was grilling steaks. I was taking my time with all these relationships. I got there an hour early to watch the Reds play on TV. Mr. Gray put some steaks on the grill and sat down to watch the game and chat. I finally asked, "How are you related to the founders of Sky Gray? Is it through you, Mr. Gray?" So the steaks waited while he told me the long history of the town. He spoke of the Scout Gray and his Miami wife, She Who Shines, their child Peace Gray found after a battle. He told how Peace's son, Sky Stephen Gray, ran a road stop here, which was first called Sky Gray's Stop, then shortened to Sky Gray. He talked about brave acts 200 years ago, Mad Anthony Wayne, Fallen Timbers, and the Greenville Treaty. He also spoke of Michiquiniqua, a great Miami war chief who wanted peace with the whites and made a truce with General Wayne in a farmhouse still owned by Ben Gray. I said, "My father is going to love this story." The steaks were overcooked, but the rhubarb pie baked by Maria and her mother was tart and perfect. The women looked disappointed. We men thought everything was fine. Once late spring came, on Sundays, the two priests and I sat on the porch to watch the sun, moon, or rain. Sometimes, on any night, I read novels alone in the dark with a flashlight or an air reader. I had no fixed work hours and enjoyed sitting on the porch with the priests or a book. I missed the children. Karen Ann said the house got a bid, but she didn't like it. She thought about it for hours and decided it was too low. I wondered if she had another reason now. As long as she was a single mom, the house was a good size for her family. It was cheap to run, had a decent mortgage, and was in a good area. The kids had a nearby playground, and maybe she wanted to protect their inheritance. I wondered if she wanted to stay until she found another husband. One Sunday in mid-May, Maria called me. That was unusual. She had been with her parents all day at a flea market, and I hadn't seen her. She just wanted to talk, she said. She asked what I did on Sunday nights, so I invited her over. She came by after dinner, around 7:30 p.m. It was still light out since it was summer. Fathers Mike and Phil were sitting in wooden rocking chairs, and I was in an Adirondack chair. Maria, a beautiful woman with red hair, walked up the sidewalk. She had her hands on her hips and wore shorts and a light short-sleeve white shirt. She looked stunning. "So is this some sort of men's club?" she asked, with a bit of annoyance in her voice. It wasn't like her to be this forward. She knew Phil and me well, and the presence of another priest probably made her comfortable. Only Mike was new to her, though she didn't know who he was. "You're always welcome here, Maria," I said. I got up, which is tricky to do gracefully from an Adirondack chair, and went down the steps to meet her. Fathers Mike and Phil stood up too. "Maria, this is Father McCalls, the hospital chief. Mike, this is Maria Gray, my girlfriend." They shook hands, and I noticed a twinkle in Mike's eye. "My pleasure to meet you, young lady. Phil and John have spoken highly of you." "It's good to finally meet you," Mike said. "It's an honor, Father," she replied. "Have a seat, either in the Adirondack or the garden chair," I said, holding her hand as she took my Adirondack chair. Phil laughed and Mike smiled. I acted annoyed and took the garden chair next to her. The Adirondack chair was great for seeing her legs in shorts. Always look on the bright side. I still held her hand. I've always loved holding hands. On Sundays, Maria would sometimes join us. She laughed and told stories. She knew a lot about her family history from her father. Phil and Mike enjoyed learning about the local history. Phil was new to the area, having come here after rehab. He was the parish priest, and Mike was from Indiana and worked in several Catholic hospitals before coming here. Both men thought knowing the local history would help them understand the community better. They had thought the town's name, Sky Gray, was about the weather, They didn't know it was a man's name. They noticed the town loved its history with names like Anthony Wayne Middle School and Fort Wayne. Maria loved talking about what she knew. Maria was changing. She was becoming more confident. I was falling in love with her again, and this time I felt she loved me too. This wasn't a quick romance. I decided to ask her to marry me. On the Sunday closest to the anniversary of the massacre, newspapers and media had big stories on the shooting. They talked about me and connections to other terrorist incidents. Homeland Security did an investigation and arrested the conspirators. They shared biographies of the terrorists and called for better checks on international travelers. There were editorials about Islamist beliefs. Homeland Security found that Yassin Talib followed these stories. He worked at a motel, tried to save money for another year of college, and felt like a failure. He thought about going home but feared they would see him as a failure too. His brother had big plans, fought, and died. Yassin wrote in an email that the name Savior of Our Merciful Lord felt like a slap in the face. Yassin was always careful in his actions. One Homeland analyst thought he was looking for a way out. Maria asked me to join her at a therapy session on a Thursday evening in June. Her therapist suggested I come, so I met Dr. Carrie Morgan. She was about 50, tall and broad-shouldered. She had a warm smile and sharp eyes. "Mr. Buck, I'm glad you're here," Dr. Carrie said. "Maria means a lot to me. I'll come whenever she or you need me," I said. "Maria has shared how she feels with you?" Dr. Carrie asked. "Yes. We've started talking about marriage. My last marriage ended last August, and I met Maria soon after," I said. Maria added, "John's met my parents, and I've met his." "Good," Dr. Carrie said. "Maria, do I have your permission to discuss your case with John?" Maria smiled. "Of course." "Okay, John, I'll ask you directly. What behaviors do you see in Maria that hint at her problem?" "She seems fragile and unsure in some situations. She gets scared easily, especially in the dark around strangers and making phone calls. She talks very quietly when meeting new people and then gets louder as the conversation goes on. But I've seen similar traits in other people, even doctors at the hospital." "So you think her condition is manageable?" Dr. Carrie asked. "Yes, very much so. She makes herself do what she needs or really wants to do. She is comfortable around priests. I saw her act confident and friendly when meeting my boss. I can see her as my wife and as a mother, handling our children's behaviors," I said, "with me." It felt strange to say my dreams out loud with Maria there to a woman I had just met. "Well, Maria, what do you think about what he said?" Maria was sitting next to me, holding my left hand between hers. "I've been more open since I met John, but I do rely on him. Like tonight, I'm a bit nervous about this meeting, so I hold his hand," she said, smiling. "I noticed," Carrie said. "That's very normal. When we're nervous, it's common to seek comfort from someone we love or see as a protector. I hold my husband's hand in the same way." Maria said, "I don't think much about running to the store anymore. I like church again, and I'm ready to join the council or something, regardless of John's involvement. He doesn't believe, but I'm thinking about the future. Having children doesn't seem so far away now. Marriage feels possible, but I'm afraid of making mistakes." She paused, overwhelmed. For her, having a child and raising a family was her dream, her image of a good life. I thought of her parents, and it all made sense. Carrie smiled and said, "How do you feel about Brandon? Brandon was the boyfriend who hurt her," she explained to me. "I hate him, but it's different now. If I saw him in a store, I'd just walk the other way. Before I thought I'd have a fit or break down," she said. She was calm now, her eyes steady, and her hand holding mine loosely. "How would you handle things if John weren't around? Could you manage an emergency with a child?" Maria was silent. "I'm scared I'd freeze or hide. I don't want to make things worse," she said, holding my hand tighter. She imagined situations anyone could face: a fire in the kitchen, a child playing near something dangerous. She feared making the wrong choice and not being able to protect the child, or worst, causing harm by mistake. She feared doing nothing because of the risk of making it worse. Carrie said, "I'm sure you'll do your best. That's all anyone can do." I remembered a line from a movie where a mother asked her sports writer husband, "How many of those players grow up scared of losing their father's love every time they play?" And the husband said, "All of them." I said, "I will love you, no matter what choices you make." For our kids or someone else's, regardless of the outcome, because I know you mean well." Both her hands held mine, and Carrie watched. We talked about various things then, the attack at the hospital, my brief moment of fame. Carrie had become Maria's friend through years of therapy. She knew Maria well, but professionally. This wasn't a couples therapy session. It was about Maria, her personality, her values, her fears. Carrie said, "Remember how long it took for you to run and run alone and then get a job and do it? You made friends, you met a man and fell in love, you go to movies and church, and you're growing independent. You're making plans. John, a lot of this is to please you or because she wants to be with you." Carrie looked directly at Maria then. "Have you two been intimate?" Carrie asked, looking straight into Maria's eyes as if the answer was important. Maria looked shocked and said, "If we decide you need to know, we'll tell you. If we were here to discuss something related to that, we would talk about it." Carrie hesitated, then laughed, and I realized why she'd asked. She knew Maria very well. Maria's shock faded when she saw me smiling. "She sounds like some military wives I know," I said. "You know her well, Doctor." Carrie said with a smile, "She has strong ideas about how people should act, what's private and what's open for discussion. It's part of why she's so hard on herself. I think we can reduce our meetings to once a month for now, Maria, and end them in a few months. You're ready. Of course, you can call me and set up an extra meeting if you need, and I may call to check in on you. How's that sound?" Maria was surprised, but then she understood. Carrie saw her shock as a sign of strength. "Good. Great. Are you sure?" Carrie just smiled and nodded. Maria took a deep breath, accepting that this moment had to come eventually. "What'll I do on Thursday nights?" she said. "You'll think of something. Play softball, join the choir, work at a soup kitchen. You'll be okay." Both of them felt happy that years of hard work had paid off. I stood up. "It's been great meeting you, Doctor." Maria hugged Carrie then, and they said some quiet, smiling words, probably about me. And we left. Chapter 10. Because You Love Maria invited me to her cousin's wedding in August. It was the biggest family gathering I had ever attended. I wore a tie and a sport coat. Maria helped button my shirt collar because it was tight, and my right hand wasn't strong enough after 14 months. Dr. Betrayal said it probably wouldn't improve much. I managed the tie myself. August was very hot, uncomfortably so, and I didn't know the bride or groom. I only knew Maria's parents and relatives she had introduced me to over the past year. Maria wore a light green dress, which really caught people's eyes. Girls with nice arms should show them off. It was hard not to stare at her, and a few men did. I later told her that I wrote down their names and planned to deal with them soon. The wedding was held in a small church a few miles south of Sky Gray. The building was tiny, and there wasn't a school in this parish. The kids had to go to Sky Gray for school, either Catholic or public. Maria dipped her fingers in the holy water as she entered and crossed herself. I walked beside her to the bride's side of the church. The bride was Teresa Gray, marrying a guy named Bryce Garrison from Hamilton. I wondered if Bryce was Catholic since there was no mass included in the ceremony. We sat near the back. I noticed a few people turning to look at Maria and me, often smiling. A little girl waved at Maria from a couple rows up, and Maria waved back. By the time things began, the church was full, and the air conditioner was struggling. There was a reception in the church basement afterward. The room was packed, every table was full. Maria took me around, introducing me to everyone. I smiled and admitted I'd probably forget all the names. After all the introductions, Maria started telling me about crazy Aunt Laurie, Aunt Dr. Beth, Cousin Bob who just got out of jail, and all the family gossip, mysteries, and illnesses. I asked, "Why are you telling me all this?" "Because Mom always said you should know every family scandal and crazy person before getting married." I looked at her. "So you think I might want to marry you?" I asked, pretending to be unsure. "I know it would be good for you to consider it," she said with confidence, and kissed me. It wasn't a quick kiss. I heard some people start to clap nearby, and I must have blushed. I sat quietly beside her for a bit. She talked to Aunt Gertie or Uncle Link, and then I reached over and held her hand. It was small, delicate, and slender. "I love you," I said. She squeezed my hand. I wanted to talk to her alone about serious things. I wanted to discuss marriage, family, and the future. Suddenly, all those deep talks that couples need to have seemed urgent. Religion, children, homes, goals, love, life. Life was full of hope, family, love, and someone wanting me. We needed to talk, and it felt important. I moved my chair closer to Maria's. Just then, the master of ceremonies turned down the lights and started to speak. They had a spotlight. He pointed out the oldest guest, the ones who traveled the farthest, the youngest, and so on. The light found each one. I tried to ignore it, but then I had to look up. Yes, we have John Buck, the savior of Merciful Lord Hospital. Stand up, John. A spotlight shone on me and Maria. I stood and waved as everyone clapped, then sat down again. I whispered to Maria, "Loving you is hard sometimes." She laughed and said, "I think that was my dad's idea." I said, "You owe me, Gray. You're lucky you're the most beautiful woman here." She looked at me deeply. Her eyes were dark blue. She leaned against me and hugged me tight. When the spotlight moved away and the lights went back up, we smiled at each other. I liked the looks we got from her relatives and friends. I guessed many people were happy to see this change in her. She had probably been the subject of family worries and talks. She looked at me, kissed me gently, and it felt right. "Someday, when you're ready, I want you to ask me to marry you," she said softly. "Good to know," I replied, my lips near her ear. I don't want to ask without knowing the answer. The DJ started playing songs, and I asked her to dance. She put her arms around my neck, and we danced close on the slow songs. We took breaks during the fast ones, but I think her parents liked seeing us so close together. At the end of the night, dancing slowly, we kissed on the dance floor. I took her hand and told her parents we would go straight home. Her father hesitated, then nodded. Her father said, "I love Maria." "I can see that. Her mother and I are pleased, and I think she wants to marry you, John. I think she's much stronger now than when we first met." He nodded and put his hand on my shoulder. "She's special. Meeting you has been a blessing. Are you ready to propose?" "I wanted a year after divorce, a year knowing her. Yes, it'll be soon. She means so much to me." My sentences were short and sharp. Her father said, "We should meet your parents. How about a barbecue next Sunday at our place?" I nodded. Maria and her mother returned, and we left holding hands. I asked her to a nice restaurant near Dayton for Friday evening. I made reservations and asked her to dress nicely. She did, and I wore a suit. It was early September, not quite autumn. I made sure to touch her when I saw her. I held her hand, touched her arm, held her chair, and let my hand rest on her neck and shoulder. She shivered at that, pressed her cheek into my hand. I whispered in her ear, "You're beautiful." I couldn't look away. I wasn't the only one who thought she looked beautiful, but tonight I wanted it to be just about us. The light was soft. I was glad. We had a small table with a candle. I held her left hand in my right and spoke to her. "Maria, I have never been so in love." She replied, "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else with anyone else. I don't care where I am as long as it's with you." I felt each of her fingers. When I reached her ring finger, I spoke softly. "I love you too. I hope you'll always love me. I'm new to being loved. I hope you'll say yes." I pulled the ring from my pocket, still in its box. I released her hand and opened the box. I spoke quietly so only she could hear. "Will you marry me?" I turned the box so she could see it. "Yes, yes," she whispered, looking at the ring and then at my eyes. "I promise to love you. I'm so touched that you love me." I took the ring and put it on her left ring finger, so thin and delicate. She gasped at the moment. I smiled and held her hand. Her eyes were bright and sparkling in the candlelight. "John," she said like she had practiced it since the first moment we spoke, "I've wanted you to love me. I never thought it would happen for me. I thought love, marriage, and family had passed me by. No man was right." She gently cried for a moment. We sipped our wine. I held her ring hand, glad it seemed to fit. Some people at other tables saw her tears, the ring box, and her left hand in mine with a diamond ring. They smiled, recognizing our special moment. It was a sweet and loving evening. The service was excellent, and the food was great. The woman with me was lovely and rare, willing to commit to me for life. We left the restaurant around 9, arm in arm. She rested her cheek on my arm sometimes. do you have more planned for this evening?" she asked. "Yes and no. But we need to talk, so I'd like to stop soon at a place I know. We can discuss all the things engaged couples should." We found that place just outside of Sky Gray, a preserved water area that wasn't buggy in mid-September. "If we go somewhere, would your parents mind or be disappointed?" I asked. "No, it's our decision." She called her parents and said they shouldn't worry, she would be late. Her father said, "We love you and completely understand. Are you engaged?" "Yes," her mother said. "I'm so happy for you. Come home safe tomorrow morning, honey." We parked. I pulled a bag out of the back seat, which Maria looked at. "I thought it might get cold. A blanket and quilt." We walked in the cool evening breeze. I held her hand. It was almost completely dark. We were alone. In the far distance, we heard the highway, but we only saw a distant glow. We sat on a park bench looking out at a wetland shining in the moonlight. She leaned against me, my arms around her and hers on mine. I whispered in her ear, "Maria, I want you so much." I held her little body against me, and we sat on a park bench looking at the moon and stars lighting the area, glistening on still waters. She sighed. "It's a beautiful night," she said softly. I nodded. "There's a spot." We walked down a path, holding hands in our nice clothes. She wore low heels and a dress. The path was level for a while and then went up to a small hill. It was grassy, soft, and overlooked the waters. There was a small breeze, chilling. I spread the blanket and quilt with Maria. Her eyes were bright, looking at the blanket, the stars, and the wetlands below. "Perfect," she said. I was behind her. She sighed and leaned back into me. I held her close, feeling the love and warmth between us. Together we watched the moon and stars light up the night, feeling a deep sense of peace and happiness, wrapped in each other's arms, knowing we were starting a new life together. "John, I feel so loved," she said. A little later I stood and looked down at her beautiful self. I shook my head and said, "Before I die, I will kiss every one of your freckles." She laughed. "You can't even see them in this light, but I look forward to it." Then we dressed, brushing leaves and twigs off as best we could, and walked back to the car. I drove her home, walked her to her door, kissed her, and let her go in alone to see her parents, to show them her ring, and maybe talk about our new relationship. She said later that they were surprised she was home by 3 in the morning. They thought we'd gone to a motel. Maria just smiled, shook her head, and said, "Better." Some moments were too special to share. I called my parents the next morning, told them I had proposed, and Maria accepted. Mom squealed. I guessed she was jumping up and down. Dad just hummed and said, "Good, good." I couldn't remember how they reacted when I proposed to Karen Ann. I picked up my parents for the picnic the next morning. When we arrived, I introduced Mom and Dad to Maria's parents, and everyone seemed happy. Mom and Dad hugged Maria and admired the ring, and I thought maybe Mom had found a special connection in my future wife. The Grays and the Bucks were easy to talk to. There was a lot of friendly chatter about the Reds, the town, the history, and us. Mr. Gray burned the hamburgers, the wine was good, and it was a pleasant picnic. I sent a message to Karen Ann suggesting she keep the house since she seemed settled there. I proposed that if she ever sold it, I would expect half of the equity as of the date of the divorce, which at current rates would be about $5,000. It was a significant amount, but I didn't want to pressure her and didn't want her to have to use her children's money to move. The kids needed a home and a future. The divorce had made our marriage a burden for her. I had moved on. She replied 3 days later that she had talked to her lawyer and I should soon get some papers to sign. 2 days later, they arrived and I signed them. We planned a wedding for March. This gave me time to settle into my new work situation. My office was growing. I now had 2 assistants and 3 full-time specialists. I sometimes wondered if they minded working for someone less qualified, but no one complained because I was the one who hired them. I was starting a master's program set up by Father Mike and a professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine. I would work in my office in the mornings or afternoons and go to classes or seminars the rest of the time. My notes to Father Mike became essays for Dr. Lauren Fortner in hospital administration. The University of Cincinnati was open to my situation and worked with me since Dr. Fortner offered to help. The program would last a year, maybe 18 months, depending on my progress. The hospital covered the cost, and I even got a federal grant. Maria wanted a Catholic wedding, which meant I needed to annul my first marriage in the eyes of the church. It was easier than I thought, but it took time. Karen Ann's lack of faithfulness was clear. Dylan was born 18 months after our wedding, proving she had not been sincere from the start. We had been separated for 8 out of the first 10 months. Father Mike, Father Phil, and Maria wrote about my character, answering questions from the church. Some months later, a board approved my application, and I was free to marry Maria. Interestingly, my Protestant mother was the happiest about the annulment. A few weeks before our wedding, we bought a house ready for move-in. It was less than a mile from Merciful Lord Hospital, a short walk to Maria's motel job, and close to Merciful God Church and elementary school. It was also near the public school. That would be a future discussion. She wanted to keep working until she found a better job. We spent every free moment cleaning, painting, and buying furniture to get the house ready. We wouldn't finish everything, but whoever does finish work on their house. At any rate, we would come home from our honeymoon to our own place. I had been living with a priest. She had been with her parents. Now, 13 months into my new job, we made enough to live in the nicer part of Sky Gray. The house had a porch, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen dining area, and a living room. Hardwood floors, older but working appliances. It was a fresh start for us. We could hear kids playing in the fields behind our house, though we'd have to deal with some dust. There were also basketball courts, a tennis court, and a public pool nearby. We were to be married at Merciful God Church with Father Mike as the celebrant. I had no formal ties to a church, and Maria was Catholic, so the priests wanted to check my beliefs. They wanted us to include children in our plans, and I had to assure them they would be raised Catholic. Catholic organizations or officials had created my job, found me a home, helped me through a divorce, introduced me to Maria, and introduced me to my best friends. I was happy to agree. I wasn't really religious myself, but I had faith, so it wasn't a hard decision. We attended meetings for engaged couples called pre-Cana. These meetings were meant to make couples think about the realities of marriage. Some couples hadn't considered the religion of their future children or even how many children they wanted. I think Maria was surprised that others hadn't discussed how things would actually work in their marriages. Our wedding was small by some standards. About 100 people attended. Maria wore light blue, her hair framing her pale face, and I thought she looked beautiful. I wore a black tuxedo. Eva from Maria's work was her maid of honor, and Father Phil was my best man. He wore a formal dark cassock and collar. When Father Mike said we could kiss, Maria touched my face as I bent down to kiss her. My mother said it was the most moving kiss she had ever seen. I remember the feeling of her fingers brushing my cheek. We left the reception around 9 and drove to a nearby motel for our first night. Maria kissed me with her arms around my neck and suggested I get comfortable. She said she wanted to put on some special clothes for me. I loosened my tie and lay on the bed, leaving a light on. There are private moments in life I'd rather keep personal to honor our taste and respect community norms. Yet it was a night filled with the bond and closeness every couple looks forward to on their wedding night. That said, it was the beginning of our journey together, mirroring the commitment and love we shared, lighting up the path ahead. She looked into my eyes and touched my face. I want to try something. Do you want to do it together? By then my pants were off and she was working on my shirt. She moved around so we could be closer and she said, I love this, as she got comfortable. I kissed her softly, feeling her hands on me, and I warned her that I might lose control soon. She smiled and kept going, and I felt her shiver from my touch. She moved a bit and I kept going. I love how you make me feel. Your touch, it's amazing. I held her close, feeling her warmth. She was light, and I carefully laid her down on the bed. Oh, John, she whispered as I looked at her. She slowly opened her legs wider. Hold me close. I was feeling strong again, and I moved closer to her. I could hear her breathe deeply. I moved slowly, and with each moment I felt us getting closer. She whispered softly as we moved together. I love what you're doing to me, she said as I was close to finishing. That night was full of closeness and love, sometimes intense and other times gentle. It's amazing how love can be different and still be so caring. The next day, she let me rest. And then she did things I loved because she did them. All the shyness was gone when we were alone. She looked at me and said, "I'm so glad you're in my life. I feel so much better with you." Maybe she became pregnant that first night, or maybe later. She made love with so much passion, like she hadn't in years. Sometimes she would pull me into our room quickly. Other times she would take her time. Once, she said, "I hope we have a boy so he'll be like you." I kissed her, enjoying every moment. "Are you saying a daughter can't be like her father?" I asked as we drove home. "No, I just mean you should take the compliment," she replied, smiling. Thinking about my first wife, I thought it was best not to argue. "Well, I think her mom is amazing, so I'll be happy if she takes after you." From then on, I called the baby she and she called it he. It confused people, but we liked it. We returned to Sky Gray happy and full of love. We were ready for our life together. There was a baseball practice at a field near our home. We heard kids playing and people cheering. It felt like a good place to start a family. I carried Maria and our unborn child inside. It started raining as we rested after our long trip. Our luggage got soaked on the porch. Chapter 11. A woman of strength, my name was in the news for what I did at Merciful Lord. Wikipedia mentioned me for the hospital event. People talked a lot online about what I said after stopping the two attackers. For over a year, I was a topic of discussion. Some websites were angry at me, most in Arabic. I don't know if my mom noticed the attention. She never talked about what I said, probably because it had a bad word. She didn't use the internet much, but must have seen my brief fame. Luckily, it faded after Susan's interview, and once the attack's anniversary passed. After things settled, I got copies of the main reports. Eric Remarque said he wrote one of them. He felt he knew the attackers well by then. The two men were Ibrahim Ajah and Youssef Talib. They stayed at a farm in Indiana and drove to Sky Gray for the attack. They wanted to show that danger could happen anywhere, not just big cities. They planned it for months and came to the country 3 months before to prepare. They left records, maybe emails or chats, leading to more arrests after the attack. I didn't know if they had funerals or not. Later, the FBI and Homeland Security found out more. Yassin Talib, Youssef's younger brother, was in the U.S. on a student visa but left before the attack. Video showed him at the airport weeks before the attack, but he didn't seem to get off the flight. He wasn't known to be in the IWC, so he wasn't a concern. During the attack, he was in a motel near Indianapolis, probably supporting them. When the attack happened, he was probably upset with how it turned out. They had planned to go through the hospital, killing many patients and leaving hundreds dead. Special Agent Remarque said their messages showed a dislike for the countryside people, using terms that meant rubes, hicks, or hillbillies. Yassin's brother died as planned, and Yassin went into hiding. No one knew where he was until he showed up in Sky Gray almost 2 years later. He collected news about the Merciful Lord attack, printing online articles or recording TV reports. He eventually heard that I had killed the gunman. He saw an interview with Susan Daggers on one of the cable channels and learned that I didn't want to encourage more attacks. Remarque mentioned that the CNN interview with Susan was on a disc inside Yassin's CD player when Homeland Security found it. Yassin also knew about my divorce from Susan and others. During his questioning, Yassin said some things that were not secret. He figured out that I was scared of revenge and had divorced my wife soon after the attack to protect her and the kids. He might have seen an interview with Karen Ann, where she said my actions were not like me at all. She was shocked at what I did because I was usually quiet and didn't stand out. She thought it wasn't a big deal because I did it. Yassin likely thought she was trying to trick him and never guessed that the Buck family was falling apart on its own. Yassin, sometimes called Yassin, was not trained or experienced. Remarque said that his lack of training helped him hide, but his anger grew over many months, and his plans were not done well. He was mad that his brother died early in the attack and that many were later caught. He felt left behind. His brother was his connection to the group, and the FBI found no sign that the remaining IWC in the Middle East even knew about his small part in the massacre. He had been in the U.S. for several years, going to school, checking locations for his brother to report, and mostly staying out of the main action. He was angry that the mission failed, but he was a student and not a professional killer. He didn't know what to do for many months. Finally, he made up his mind. He knew the enemy after years of living among them. He wanted to make them feel pain. Americans had one good point. They loved their families. So he decided to hurt me by killing my family in front of me and teach America a lesson. Maybe he could even get away after. He thought he would live to kill again and perhaps return home as a hero. He kept changing his mind, emailing friends and family in the Middle East. He lived on the internet and had few contacts except for his work as a clerk and sometimes going to stores. He prayed more while alone. Someone, Homeland Security didn't say who, pushed him to take revenge on me, the person who saved people in the merciful Lord attack. He had my old address and thought he could trick me into coming to the house, even with my fake divorce. An email was found showing he accepted the mission. The email was sent on my wedding day. Our wedding didn't get much media attention. People knew I liked privacy, and interest in my life had faded. He started his plan the day Maria found out she was pregnant. It was late on a mild night in April, about 5 weeks after Maria and I got married. That was the day Maria told me she was pregnant. Yasin acted alone, just like he had lived since the massacre. He had one gun and several rounds of bullets. He also had 5 one-gallon cans of gasoline. His plan was to tie everyone up in the house, make one person call me if I wasn't there, and then when I showed up, shoot us all. After that, he would set the house on fire. He thought he could escape after killing us and burning the house. After dark, he parked in front of Karen Ann's house, using a car given to him by Ajah just before the massacre. Karen Ann and the 2 kids were in their rooms. Dylan was asleep in his bed, and Hanley was in hers across from him, still awake and making soft noises. Karen Ann was reading in bed with a drink on the nightstand, but she wasn't drunk yet. It was about 10:30 at night. Yasin went to the back door, found it locked, and broke it open. He shattered the glass in the window, cutting his shoulder a bit. He ran down the hall, looked into the main bedroom, and saw Karen Ann fumbling for her phone. She screamed and wished she had her phone closer. Yasin grabbed her by the arm, pointed the gun at her, and made her get on the bed, face down. She was probably very scared at this point. He put the gun to her head, told her to cross her wrists behind her, and then tied her up with plastic cable ties. They were strong and held well. Karen Ann begged him not to hurt the children. He pulled her into the living room and sat her in a chair, tying her legs to it with duct tape. Her back was to the front window. He found the 2 kids, carried each under an arm, and put the crying children on the couch. He tied their wrists and ankles, but not to the couch. The kids got quieter when he gagged Karen Ann by wrapping tape around her head. Just a strip over her mouth didn't work, so he had to wind it around several times. They all sat for a while. He was waiting for the kids to calm down. They didn't want it to be done, so he wrapped tape around their heads, too. It was about 11 at night. Once everyone was quiet, he took the tape off Karen Ann's head. It hurt her because the tape was stuck in her hair. He asked for my phone number, but Karen Ann didn't give it. She told him quickly when he pointed a gun at Hanley. He said he wanted her to call me and get me there right away. He dialed the number for her. It was 11:13 at night when she called, according to my cell phone. "Hello?" I answered. I saw Karen Ann's number on the screen. Maria and I were heading home after sharing good news with our parents. "John, it's Karen Ann." Her voice was louder than usual. She sounded worried. "You need to come over right now. It's Dylan. He's gone and I can't find him." I paused, thinking it might not be serious, but her tone made me uneasy. "You've checked all the rooms and behind the couch?" I asked. How far could a 3-year-old go in a small house? "Yes, and he's gone. Just gone. He was here and now his bed's empty. Hurry, John, he's never done this before. Be careful." She hung up. I called back, but no one answered, and it went to voicemail. Maria saw my worry. "What happened?" We stood on our porch. "That was Karen Ann. She says Dylan's missing. I think I should go help look for him." I headed to the car, and Maria followed. "I'll come too. 2 people are better for looking, especially if he's out in the dark." Her quick offer showed she was worried for Dylan, too. I briefly wondered if she was also concerned about Karen Ann. I thought about calling the police, but figured Karen Ann had already done that. A missing teen at 11 p.m. might not seem urgent to the police, but a missing 3-year-old would. Why did she tell me to be careful? Maria, she said something strange. She told me to be careful. Has she ever been concerned about me before? Maria thought for a moment. No, but maybe she's just worried about Dylan. Yeah, or it could be a warning, I said. Whether or not she meant to, it seemed like a hint. I think we should go, but be cautious. We parked down the street and took a sharp angle to avoid being seen from the house. From a distance, we saw a strange car in front of the house. Maybe others had come to help, or something else was going on. The house was dark. The porch light's off, I said to Maria. No lights inside. Does that seem odd to you when a kid is missing? Very, Maria replied. You'd turn on every light to find a missing child. Something's up inside, I told Maria. I don't know that car. Follow me and stay close. She smiled and squeezed my hand. We moved through neighbors' yards, finding an unlocked gate at the Murphys. Holding on to Maria, I approached my old house from the side. I saw the front door was shut and locked. We went to the back door, which was broken open. There were no lights inside, but the moon was full and a street lamp was on. We need the police, Maria said. I stepped back and called 911, reporting a break-in. I gave the address. Possible hostage situation. I hung up. You stay here. I might have to fight, and I don't want you in danger. If there's more than one person, just run, okay? She nodded. She knew I had to think about the kids and Karen Ann, too. I went to the kitchen door and pushed it. It opened slightly, making a crunching sound on the broken glass. I stepped in as best I could, avoiding most of the glass. I stopped and listened. I heard muffled crying from the living room. It was either Hanley or Dylan. I moved slowly to the doorway to see. The light was dim, mostly from the street lamps outside. I saw shapes in the room. Karen Ann, taped up, with tape over her mouth and around her head. Her hands were tied behind her. She sat on a chair by the window. Hanley was tied on the couch, and Dylan was there too. Then I saw a man by the front window. I moved into view. Karen Ann stared at me, but it was hard to see clearly in the dark. The man by the window glanced at her. Buck should be here by now, right? He had a heavy accent. He seemed to be talking to himself, or Karen Ann. The house was small, and it sounded like he was alone. Karen Ann made faint sounds, but the gag kept her from speaking clearly. The man turned back to the window. I thought he had a gun in his right hand near Karen Ann's head, though it hung loosely. His left hand held the curtain aside to look out. I couldn't make a move towards him without risking her safety, not from this angle. I was about 13 feet away and a coffee table was in the way, but there was another doorway on the other side of the couch next to Dylan. I quietly went back through the kitchen to the other doorway. I signaled to Maria, still at the kitchen door, that there was one guy. She nodded. I peeked around the other doorway. There was Karen Ann again. The guy was looking out the window. I was close enough to Dylan to grab him. Still, the pistol was in the guy's right hand, pointed down near Karen Ann's head. His back was mostly toward me. Did he have a vest? A vest with bombs could kill us all if it exploded. I didn't see one, just a cotton jacket, and his hands were in sight with no obvious trigger. As he looked outside again, I heard sirens in the distance. He was really focused now, 8 or 10 feet away from me, looking hard. When it became clear the police were coming, he might start shooting. I took a breath and moved. I took 3 running steps and hit him as hard as I could with my right shoulder, my right arm wrapping around him to keep him from raising that pistol. I remembered my football coach saying, "All you think is smash." I shouted it as I hit him, "Smash!" We both crashed through the window, breaking drapes, glass, and wood. We were on the porch and he was under me. I didn't want the guy to get up, so I kept hitting him. I thought I knocked his pistol away. I was furious, and it took him a few seconds to understand what happened, but he was fighting back. He was bigger and stronger, and my right hand had no strength. He was solid. He rolled us to our sides. The porch light came on. I flailed at him with my left and right hands, hitting his head against the wooden porch floor, yelling and angry, but my right hand was weak and useless. I knew he would win this fight once he got his bearings. I was getting desperate, hoping the police or something would help. He was pushing on my chin, bending my head back painfully. Then Maria was there with the pistol in her hands. She dropped to her knees on the broken glass behind his head, gasping in pain. She pointed the gun at the ceiling with both hands and fired a shot into the porch roof, the loud sound breaking the night. We stopped at the noise. I felt him hesitate, and there was silence except for sirens a few hundred yards away. Then she pressed the muzzle hard against his head and shouted, "Mister, if you move, I will shoot you." He took a deep breath and moved a bit, so she pressed the gun harder against his head and warned, "Don't mess with me." Maria. All the fight drained out of him. My left hand was pushing the side of his head into the floor. He stopped struggling and went still. He was conscious but stunned. Blood streamed from his head where I had knocked it. He looked defeated, but I didn't care. I struggled away from him, my left hand still pushing his head into the floor, and got onto my knees next to Maria, feeling the sharp pain of broken glass in my knees. Some of my weight was on his head, my hand near the gun. "Maria, I'll take the pistol." I tried to sound calm and in control. She handed it to me without looking anywhere but at the guy, keeping the muzzle against his head. I kept the gun against him with my left hand, my right weakly supporting. I would have pulled the trigger if he moved a muscle. Maria stood and went into the house just as the police arrived. "Help, officers, help me, please," I called out. They came with guns drawn and ordered me to drop the weapon. There were a man and a woman. "Not where he might get it," I said loudly. I put it down and flung it away along the floor. I raised my hands. I hurt. I was cut and bruised, but we were all alive. Maria and Karen Ann came out, each carrying a kid, Maria with Hanley and Karen with Dylan, as more police cars pulled up and officers arrived. Karen Ann had tape hanging from her hair, and so did Dylan and Hanley. Karen kept saying to arrest the guy on the floor. One officer recognized me, and finally I could lower my hands. Karen Ann and Maria were around me with the kids, and my arms went around them. "You okay?" I asked Maria. She leaned into me. I felt her nod. Karen Ann, to my right, spoke fast with relief and excitement. "I thought he was going to kill us. I couldn't think of a way to warn you." She was against me, tears on her face, but she was strong. Her eyes were clear and determined to protect her children and herself. "You did. You told me to be careful." She looked at me confused. She didn't remember saying it. I hugged Hanley then too, still in Maria's arms, and Dylan, but I wouldn't let Maria go. She was shaking, and I thought she might be crying, but she wasn't. "Quite a night," I said quietly to her hair. She said, "I didn't want to face the world without you." "You saved our lives," I said. I felt her nod. "I didn't want to move. I'm not sick anymore." "No, you aren't." She paused as police cuffed the prisoner and moved him away. "I think I'll be a good mom." I took a breath and squeezed her, knowing she had fought off her struggles a bit more. She probably smiled, but her face was against my chest, so I couldn't tell. Chapter 12. Resolutions. For a week, I worried Maria would lose the baby from the stress and excitement of the hostage situation. She didn't. 3 weeks later, my cell phone rang. I saw the number and a wave of fear swept through me. I forced myself to answer the phone. Maria was with me and heard my side of the conversation. "John, this is Karen Ann." "Yes, Karen." "I'd like to invite you and Maria over for dinner. Bring the kids, even though I'd rather they be sleeping. There is something I want to talk about." "Karen Ann, I don't—" She was firm. "I need to thank you again, and I have a problem. I really need to talk to both of you." "I don't want to see your parents. You understand that?" "Never," I stressed. "Of course, just me and the kids." "Okay." I put the phone down. Maria sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Why?" she asked. "Are you so angry at our parents?" I thought about it for a moment. I'd been acting on instinct, just knowing I didn't want them in my life. It came to me after I thought about the hopes and dreams I'd had for Karen Ann when we started our life together. I'd seen her parents as help and support. I think it's because they gave her away at the wedding, to me. It became my job to take care of her, my job to protect her. It was their role to support our marriage as long as I was faithful to it. Maria nodded. "It's sad, the whole thing." The next Sunday around 2, we knocked at the door of the old house. The window had been repaired. I wondered if it was covered under homeowner's insurance. Karen Ann greeted us, shook Maria's hand, and had us go straight to the table. The children were napping, she said. We ate lasagna and drank coffee. Maria refused, telling Karen Ann that she was 2 months pregnant and avoiding caffeine, receiving congratulations and a glass of water. "That's good news," Karen Ann said. She sounded sincere, but I'd heard her say "I do" once, and that had sounded sincere also. She said, "You knew you were pregnant when—" "Yeah, that same day the terrorist was here," Maria said. Karen Ann nodded slightly and took a breath. "John, Maria, My mom is not in good health. My dad is okay, but you know, John, that he is not very warm. My parents have been my support since our divorce, but Mom is probably not going to be able to take care of the kids if I couldn't. That's what I want to talk about." I looked at Maria, looking for a clue as to how she felt. She was looking at Karen Ann, eyes bright. That's a scary look for any husband to see in his wife. She knew how I felt about Karen Ann. I wondered how Maria would feel after this talk. "You're worried about the kids if you were sick or died or something?" I asked. She nodded. "My parents understand why you don't want to see them, John, and they agree it's for good reason." She was upset and needed a moment. "But they suggested you—" She stood up, went to the refrigerator and picked up a sealed envelope from on top. "They asked me to give this to you. They hope you'll read it. It's for both of you. I know you've never met them, Maria. Maybe someday." She slid it across the table to Maria. "Later," she said. She sat again. "Is this just in case, or is there a reason something might happen?" I wanted to know if she was sick. "I need to get help," she started to say, staring at the wall. She stopped and looked right at us. "I need to go to rehab. I've been drinking and I have to go. My principal gave me an ultimatum. My job is in danger. I'm overwhelmed and I can't stop. I can't leave the kids with Mom anymore, not for more than a day. Anyway, after the hostage thing, I decided if anything happened to me, I'd want you to have the kids. You and Maria, both. I would be grateful if you'd agree. I know after what I did." She just shook her head and said no more. Maria said, "You're asking us to watch your kids while you're in rehab, and then you want to name us as your kids' guardians if anything happens to you?" "Yes, I believe in you, both of you. I saw you tear through that room, Maria, and you saved us. And the way you held Hanley after you cut the cords. Please consider it." I said the first thing I thought. If it ever happened, I'd never take them to their grandparents. Maria looked at me, and for the first time in our relationship, I thought she was disappointed. Maria said to Karen Ann, "Your parents live in town, right?" "Yes," Karen Ann said. "Not far." Maria was making plans already, plans to get around me. She'd get the kids to their grandparents if I wouldn't. She knew I'd not stop loving her for doing something she thought was good. Even I thought it was good. I just wouldn't do it. I realized she wasn't scared of Karen Ann with me. She wasn't scared of the love I felt for Hanley and Dylan. She was secure in my love for her. I had that most terrifying of wives, an equal. Taking a deep breath, Karen Ann said, "If they're ever orphaned, I'm asking you to raise them as best you can. All of their inheritance would be in your control. Right now I'm asking you to take care of them for a few months while I get better. My parents aren't part of this. It's my choice, and if you don't want to visit my parents, then don't." Maria looked at me. "They're kids, John. You could have a closer relationship with them." She knew my soul and my mind before I did. I hated that. I kept my expression serious. Karen Ann spoke quietly. "I have nowhere else to go. There is no one else in my life. I'm not asking you to adopt them if the worst comes to the worst. That would be up to you. I know some good parents at work, but I want my kids to be good. Not like their father, not like me. Good. You two are my first choice, but also the only ones I'd choose, both of you. If not you, it would just be the luck of the draw." She looked from one to the other of us as she spoke. She was different now. She had been careless before, and now she was facing her drinking problem. From what she said, her dating life was almost non-existent due to the responsibility of raising 2 kids, keeping the house, and working. Perhaps because of all that, she had developed one good trait. She loved her kids. Maybe it would lead to others. She was sure of one thing about me. I would rather play ball on the floor with a little kid than do almost anything else. I would never turn my back on a child who needed help. Karen Ann was trying to fix her life. How much strength, how much desperation did it take to admit her mistakes towards me? She begged us. I had been helped by 2 priests, a doctor, a lawyer, a group of people in Cleveland. I had been thanked by a grateful husband and father, a high school writer, cops, and hostages. Maybe it would not be easy. I smiled to myself, looking at my hand in Maria's, thinking of a guy who taught philosophy but did not wear socks. What do I deserve? I looked straight at Karen. I was quiet for a moment and then asked, "How long for the rehab? 2 months maybe, but it's different for each person, so... Summer. She shrugged, feeling embarrassed but also hopeful. She knew I was thinking about it. I saw the determination in her, how focused she was on what I said. She was worried about her kids and only her kids. She was listening for one thing. Would we do it or not? I said, "We will never be close, Karen Ann. You and I'm not your friend. Some things are forever, and the things you did were unforgettable, if not unforgivable." I paused, thinking about what to say next. I shook my head as she nodded hers. It would always be a bit awkward, and maybe the kids would notice. Maybe she'd find a man, and all this preparation would fade into the background of our lives. I felt the small woman on my left, felt her trust in me. She knew me and loved me. Byron was right. The greatest joy was knowing you were loved. It would be scary not to live up to it. Maybe I could be worthy of it. I saw the hope in Karen Ann's eyes when I stopped talking. She had not heard no. I turned to my wife. "We should talk." Maria looked at me, squeezed my left hand with her small fingers and smiled. "Yes, we should." Hey, audience. If you liked this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story.